Hey there, tonight we're wandering through the frosty cobblestones of medieval London, where Christmas cheer meant more than just figgy pudding. Brace yourself, because the truth is, there was as much mischief as there was merriment. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. In a city where the river was as much a hazard as a highway, and the aroma of roasting chestnuts fought valiantly against the ever-present stench of, well, everything else, Christmas in 14th century London was nothing short of an adventure. Forget the Hallmark card version of the holiday. This was a time when celebrating required a certain grit. The streets were a festival of mud and muck, and the weather seemed to revel in being as inhospitable as possible. Yet, amidst the chaos, Londoners found a way to deck the halls, if by halls you mean drafty wooden homes that doubled as wind tunnels. Now, let's talk economics, shall we? If you think your holiday bonus doesn't stretch far enough, spare a thought for the medieval worker. The average labourer in London was pulling in about 2 shillings a week, which roughly translates to the purchasing power of a pack of gum and a soda today, or maybe a gingerbread man, if you're feeling festive. But the cost of a full-blown Christmas feast, that could set you back a whopping 12 shillings, and that was just the basics: a goose, some coarse bread, and a bit of cheese. Add in a few pints of ale, and you're looking at a budget that would make Ebenezer Scrooge wince. Of course, the church had a finger in this holiday pie, too. As the moral compass of the era, sometimes pointing due north, other times spinning like a weather vane, the church ensured that Christmas was as much about piety as partying. Midnight Mass was the highlight, a chance to wear your cleanest rags and sit in a freezing cathedral, contemplating your sins, or at least pretending to, while sneaking glances at the stained glass. And let's not forget the 12 Days of Christmas, which wasn't just a catchy tune, but a medieval endurance test of religious observance and celebration. But before you assume, these folks were all sackcloth and solemnity, think again. The holiday spirit was alive and well, fueled by wassail, a potent concoction of ale, sugar, spices, and anything else that might kill a few germs or knock you out cold. Carolers roamed the streets, singing and occasionally begging, since catching a tune was sometimes easier than catching a meal. And then there were the mummers, performing plays that were part entertainment, part public nuisance, with costumes that looked like they'd been assembled by a blindfolded jester. It's easy to romanticize these traditions, picturing a simpler time when life wasn't ruled by screens and schedules. But medieval London was a city teetering on the edge of chaos, where the line between celebration and survival was thinner than the wafer you'd receive at communion. Hygiene was a luxury, so having a clean face for Christmas was practically a miracle. Bathing, optional, and often avoided lest you catch a chill that no amount of wassail could cure. So, next time you grumble about the stress of holiday shopping or the awkwardness of the office party secret Santa, remember this: our medieval ancestors were out there, making merry with what little they had, in a city that resembled a mud-splashed battlefield more than a winter wonderland. They found joy in the simplest acts: a shared song, a hearty toast, a fleeting moment of warmth amidst the cold, and maybe, just maybe, that's the real spirit of Christmas medieval style. Ah, but what's a celebration without a feast? And what's a feast without a few culinary traditions that could make or break your holiday spirit, or your teeth for that matter? Medieval Christmas in London was a veritable smorgasbord of delights, assuming you could afford them or had the connections to wrangle an invite to a wealthier friend's table. Let's dive into the belly of the beast, quite literally, in some cases. First up, the piece de resistance of any self-respecting medieval Christmas table, the boar's head. Yes, you heard that right. While today we might settle for a glazed ham, back then a decapitated pig's noggin was the ultimate showstopper. But this wasn't just any old pig. It was a wild boar, fearsome and fierce, hunted in the king's forest or imported if you fancied a bit of extravagance. The head would be boiled, then dressed up with a mane of rosemary and bay leaves, an apple crammed into its mouth for that extra touch of class. Talk about a centerpiece with bite. Now, if you're picturing medieval folks ripping into turkey legs like extras in a Robin Hood movie, think again. Turkeys wouldn't strut into Europe until the 16th century, thanks to some transatlantic trade shenanigans. Instead, geese were the go-to bird, plump and fatty, perfect for roasting. But here's the kicker. These birds were often so expensive, you'd need to pool resources with neighbors or pray for a Yuletide miracle if you wanted one gracing your table. And then there were mince pies, far from the sugary confections we know today. Medieval mince pies were a savory affair, a hearty concoction of minced meat, surprise, suet, and a blend of spices that would keep you guessing. Sweet enough to tempt your taste buds, but robust enough to fill your belly. These pies were baked with a crust that doubled as a medieval Tupperware, preserving the precious contents from the drafty kitchen's damp. Speaking of spices, let's talk economics. You see, the real luxury at a medieval feast wasn't just the meat, but the spices that adorned it. These aromatic wonders were the medieval equivalent of gold dust, imported from the far reaches of the known world. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, each one a status symbol, flaunting wealth and connections with every bite. The spice trade was a treacherous business, with merchants risking life and limb to transport these fragrant treasures across land and sea. In fact, a pound of saffron could cost as much as a horse. But how did they manage all this culinary magic without the aid of modern conveniences? Picture a kitchen that looked more like a blacksmith's workshop than a place for baking cookies. Massive hearths roared day and night, the only source of heat and cooking power. Cooks had arms like blacksmiths from turning spits and hauling cauldrons, while scullery maids elbow-deep in dishwater were the unsung heroes keeping the operation afloat. Without refrigeration, preserving food was an art form, relying on salting, smoking, and pickling to keep the Christmas spread from becoming a botulism buffet. The logistics of preparing a medieval feast were a juggling act. Ingredients were either homegrown or sourced from bustling markets, where haggling was as much an art as cooking. The economic implications were clear. A successful feast could cement one's social standing, while a flop could leave your reputation as cold as last year's pudding. Hosting such an affair required planning, resources, and a network of friends or vassals willing to pitch in. But let's not gloss over the stark reality. Many Londoners didn't have the luxury of such feasts. The rich could indulge, but the poor made do with whatever scraps they could muster. In a city where the line between wealth and poverty was as stark as a midwinter's night, Christmas was a time of stark contrast, a season of abundance for some, a struggle for others. Yet, despite the challenges, or perhaps because of them, medieval Londoners found a way to turn their feasting into an art form, a testament to human resilience and creativity. They revelled in the small joys, a heart pie, a shared cup of wassail, the warmth of a crackling fire. And maybe, just maybe, that's why their stories endure, a reminder that even in the darkest times, a little spice can go a long way. As the last embers of that crackling fire flicker out, let's turn our focus to the people who gathered around it. If you thought medieval London's Christmas was all about food, then you're only nibbling at the edges of a much larger pie. This was a society where your social standing was as visible as the mud on your boots, and often just as hard to shake off. But here's the twist. During Christmas, the lines between the classes blurred, if only for a fleeting moment, like a snowflake on a warm palm. Picture this. The nobility, draped in velvets and furs, hosting grand feasts in their manorial halls. These affairs were all about ostentation, with tables groaning under the weight of roasted meats, imported wines, and enough spices to make your head spin and your wallet light. The upper crust would hire minstrels and jesters to entertain, their laughter a little louder and their indulgence a bit more extravagant, perhaps to mask the ever-present spectre of political intrigue. After all, hosting a successful Christmas feast could bolster alliances faster than you could say, wassail. The nobility had the luxury of turning Christmas into a display of power and prestige, but let's not forget that this was a double-edged sword. A poorly executed feast could have tongues wagging all the way to Twelfth Night, ruining reputations faster than you could stockpile those treasured spices. But the affluent had another ace up their sleeve. The practice of misrule. During this topsy-turvy time, the roles of master and servant were humorously reversed, giving everyone a taste of power, however fleeting. Lords and ladies might find themselves serving their own retainers, a charming charade that allowed them to play at humility without relinquishing control. Think of it as a medieval version of the office holiday party, where the boss wears a silly hat and pretends to be one of the gang. Meanwhile, the common folk were certainly not sitting idle. Far from wallowing in their social limitations, they embraced the festive season with a vigor that belied their often meagre means. The streets of London were alive with a carnival of colour and sound, as the lower classes found joy and camaraderie in simpler pleasures. Community gatherings were a staple, with neighbours pooling resources for a communal feast, each bringing what they could spare. Bread, cheese, and ale might not sound like much, but shared among friends, they became a feast fit for a king, or at least a king in spirit. In the heart of this communal spirit was the concept of good cheer, which was less about material wealth and more about generosity and goodwill. It was a time to strengthen bonds, resolve feuds, and share what little you had, embodying the true essence of the season. While the nobility flaunted their riches in grand halls, the commoners found warmth and joy in the camaraderie of their local taverns, where the ale flowed as freely as the laughter. Yes, the ale was weak and the accommodations draughty, but the spirit of the gathering was anything but. Now, let's debunk a common myth, the notion that medieval Christmas was a uniform experience across all strata. The truth is, Christmas was as varied as the people who celebrated it. While the wealthy might have indulged in imported delicacies, the poor found satisfaction in making the most of what they had. A simple roasted leg of mutton, seasoned with whatever herbs could be foraged, was as much a token of the season as any gilded boar's head. And yet, for all these differences, Christmas had a curious way of equalizing people, if only for a night. The tradition of caroling, for instance, was a communal activity that transcended class boundaries. Groups of singers, often a ragtag mix of the young, the old, the sober, and the not-so-sober, would wander from house to house, serenading their neighbours in exchange for a hot drink or a warm bite. It was a tradition that brought the city together, one out-of-tune note at a time. Of course, the reality wasn't all rosy. The streets of London were harsh and unforgiving, especially in winter. For the poorest, the struggle to survive was unrelenting, Christmas or not. Beggars lined the corners, hoping for a charitable handout from the more fortunate, and many would find themselves relying on the church's charity for a meagre meal. The church, ever the moral compass, would remind the wealthy of their Christian duty to give alms, a gentle nudge to part with a coin or two in the name of goodwill. But let's not pretend that this was a Dickensian tale of woe and redemption. The medieval mindset was pragmatic, viewing charity not just as a moral obligation, but as a means of securing one's own salvation. Little generosity now could, after all, pave the way to an eternal feast in the afterlife. And so, the act of giving was as much about personal gain as it was about altruism, a notion that might strike a chord even today. Social dynamics at Christmas were a dance of contrasts and contradictions. Nobles and peasants, rich and poor, all played their parts in this festive theatre, each contributing to the season's rich tapestry. In a city teetering on the edge of chaos, where the line between feast and famine was as thin as a wafer, Christmas was a brief respite. It was a time when even the humblest could dream of grandeur, and the grandest could pretend, if only for a moment, to be humble. As the festive season drew to a close, the city would gradually return to its usual rhythm, the echoes of carols and the warmth of shared laughter fading into memory. The nobles would return to their intrigues, the commoners to their daily toil. The streets would once again be the domain of mud and muck. But for those precious days, London was a place transformed, a city where, despite the rigid social hierarchies, everyone found a reason to celebrate. In the end, Christmas in medieval London was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It was a reminder that, no matter the era, people have always found ways to carve out moments of joy amidst the challenges of daily life. And perhaps, in those moments, the true magic of the season lay not in the grandeur of the feast or the opulence of the halls, but in the shared humanity that brought people together, year after year. And if you thought medieval Christmas was all about feasting and the occasional reversal of roles, think again. Let's peel back the layers of myth and legend that have wrapped themselves around the holiday like a medieval mince pie crust, thick, savory, and sometimes a little tough to chew through. First up, let's tackle the origins of certain carols that have become the perennial soundtrack to our modern festivities. The 12 Days of Christmas, for example, is often romanticized as a simple folksy ditty, but its roots dig deep into a time when covert religious education was the name of the game. Legend suggests the song was a coded catechism used by Catholics in England to teach their faith during times of Protestant repression. Each line symbolized a key tenet of Catholic belief. But let's be real, historians have largely debunked this tidy narrative. The song likely evolved as a memory and forfeit game, where missing a line meant paying a penalty, usually in the form of a boozy round. The timeless tradition of turning education into a drinking game. Another carol with a juicy backstory is Good King Wenceslas, a tune that evokes images of nobility and benevolence. The real Wenceslas, or rather Saint Wenceslaus, was a 10th century Duke of Bohemia, known for his piety and charity. But the song itself didn't appear until the 19th century, penned by an English hymn writer. So, while Wenceslas himself was indeed a figure of historical note, his snowy journey to help a poor man on the Feast of Stephen is more Victorian fantasy than medieval fact. The appeal of a benevolent monarch braving the elements for the sake of charity is hard to resist, even if the reality is more about Victorian morality than medieval magnanimity. Now, onto the myth of the medieval Christmas miracle. Tales of animals talking at midnight and snow falling on cue have all the trappings of a Hallmark special. However, the reality was often less enchanting. The concept of a Christmas miracle was more a reflection of the times, a world where life was unpredictable and miracles were not just hoped for but fervently relied upon. Amidst the harshness of winter, a miraculous event was a comforting thought, a narrative balm to soothe the trials of daily life. But let's shift our gaze to the church, the omnipresent institution that played both cheerleader and chaperone to medieval Christmas festivities. On one hand, the church promoted Christmas as a sacred time, a period of reflection and devotion. Midnight Mass was the spiritual highlight, drawing the faithful into the cold embrace of stone cathedrals. However, the church also took on the role of party pooper, imposing restrictions to curb the more hedonistic tendencies of the season. Revelry was encouraged, but only up to a point. The clergy preached against excess and debauchery, reminding the flock that Christmas should be more about Christ and less about carousing. Yet, even in this bastion of morality, there were medieval Scrooges, a moniker we now bestow with a smirk. These were the clergy and local officials who grumbled about the noise, the waste, and the occasional brawls that erupted from too much wassail and too little restraint. They issued edicts and proclamations, urging a return to simpler, more pious celebrations. But let's be honest, it's hard to keep the lid on a city determined to let loose, if only for a short while. The spirit of Christmas was irrepressible, and the people found ways to celebrate, sanctioned or not. The church's dual role as both promoter and controller of Christmas festivities highlights the delicate balance of medieval life, a dance between the sacred and the secular, the spiritual and the worldly. It was a time when the divine was never far from the mundane, and the line between the two was often blurred. The church's influence extended far beyond the cathedral walls, shaping not just religious practice, but social norms and cultural traditions. And let's not forget the economic angle, because, surprise, surprise, the church wasn't above profiting from the season. The sale of indulgences, donations, and other ecclesiastical paraphernalia swelled the coffers, a divine business model if ever there was one. This was capitalism in cassocks, a reminder that even in the most spiritual of settings, money talked, sometimes louder than the choir. In the end, medieval Christmas was a complex tapestry of myth and reality, woven together with threads of tradition, faith, and a healthy dose of pragmatism. It was a time when the lines between legend and life were fluid, shifting with the needs and desires of the people. The myths have endured because they offer a glimpse into the hopes and dreams of a bygone era, a world where miracles were sought after and the spirit of the season was both a celebration and a necessity. As we unravel these myths and legends, let's remember that they tell us as much about our ancestors as the facts do. They reveal a world where the extraordinary was always just a whisper away from the ordinary, where the magic of Christmas lay not in the gifts or the feasts, but in the shared humanity that brought people together, year after year. while those medieval myths and legends have been passed down like a game of historical telephone. We find ourselves in a modern world where medieval Christmas customs are as ubiquitous as holiday sales and pumpkin spice lattes. So, which of these ancient traditions have we polished up and kept on the mantle, and which have we tossed into the historical junk drawer? Let's start with a classic, the Christmas feast. While today's holiday tables are more likely to feature turkey, thank you, Columbian exchange, than a boar's head, the essence remains, a grand meal that brings people together. Yet, it's worth noting that our modern feasting extravaganzas might make a medieval Londoner do a double take. Back then, a Christmas feast was as much a display of social status as it was an opportunity for community bonding. Fast forward to today, and we've democratized the feast. Everyone can partake in a holiday meal that would rival the tables of medieval nobility. Just ask your local supermarket's frozen turkey section. Then there's the matter of gift-giving. In medieval times, exchanging gifts wasn't the festive frenzy we've come to know. The tradition was more about showing respect and allegiance, often in the form of practical items like food or clothing. Gifts were exchanged on New Year's Day rather than Christmas, with the day itself reserved for religious observance. Fast forward a few centuries, and thanks to a certain jolly figure in a red suit, Christmas morning has become a paper and ribbon battlefield worthy of the most strategic medieval campaign. And what about caroling? The tradition of singing your heart out in the streets for a bit of holiday cheer, or a heart drink if you're lucky. This survives today, albeit with a little more melody and a little less begging. While medieval carolers might have been driven by necessity, today's carolers are more likely motivated by nostalgia and the promise of a warm reception, or perhaps just the satisfaction of belting out jingle bells off-key. As for wassailing, our modern equivalent is more about sipping mulled wine at a holiday market than swilling questionable ale in a chilly tavern, but the spirit of community and cheer remains. Now, let's talk about the 12 days of Christmas, a concept that's been boiled down into a catchy song and a marketing gimmick. The original 12 days were a marathon of religious and secular observance, a time to reflect and revel before the long, bleak winter truly set in. Today, if you're lucky, it's a countdown to sales, with each day bringing a new discount or deal. Call it capitalism's gift to the season. The medieval practice of misrule, where social roles were humorously reversed, has largely faded into the background, but traces of it linger in the playful chaos of holiday parties and celebrations. Think of it as the ancestor of the modern office holiday party, where the CEO dons a Santa hat and attempts to blend in with the rest of the elves. But what would a medieval Londoner think of our current Christmas celebrations? Picture this. A time traveller from the 14th century, wide-eyed at the sight of electric lights twinkling on artificial trees, bewildered by the concept of online shopping, and utterly confused by the idea of Black Friday. They might marvel at the abundance and variety of food available year-round, no more relying on the whims of harsh winters and harvests, and the notion of flying reindeer. Well, that might just be the cherry on top of the bizarre holiday Sunday. Yet, in spite of their shock at our modern excesses, they might recognize the same timeless threads. The gathering of loved ones, the sharing of stories and songs, the spirit of giving, albeit wrapped in shiny paper and powered by capitalism. They would see how we've taken the kernel of medieval Christmas cheer and grown it into something that, despite its commercial trappings, still holds a glimmer of the old magic. The legacy of medieval Christmas is a testament to the resilience of traditions, the human capacity for adaptation, and the desire to find joy and connection in any era. In a world where change is the only constant, these traditions have morphed and evolved, yet they continue to bind us together, much like the wassailers of old, singing for the sheer joy of it, and perhaps a hot drink on a cold night. As we gather around our modern fireplaces, whether real or virtual, we can appreciate the echoes of the past that resonate through our celebrations. The medieval Londoner might be astonished by the world we've built, but they'd likely raise a cup of wassail in salute to our shared humanity, a reminder that while times change, the heart of Christmas beats on. And so, in the spirit of that enduring tradition, we can say with confidence that the real magic of Christmas isn't in the gifts or the feasts, but in the connections we forge, the memories we create, and the human spirit that, like a well-seasoned pie, stands the test of time. Your day begins with the sharp clang of metal and the acrid scent of sulfur. Welcome to the medieval alchemist's workshop. Forget any dreams of Hogwarts-esque whimsy. This place is more mad scientist's lair than school of magic. The room buzzes with a chaotic energy, filled with an array of peculiar tools and substances, each with the potential to either unlock the secrets of the universe or blow the whole place sky-high. Spoiler alert. More often than not, it's the latter. Step over that puddle of mercury. Yes, the very same toxic metal we now know not to touch without a hazmat suit. In the 14th century, alchemists were practically bathing in the stuff. Mercury was one of the foundational elements of their work, believed to be a key ingredient in the quest to transmute base metals into gold. It was also thought to be essential in the pursuit of the philosopher's stone, the elusive substance said to grant immortality. Spoiler number 2. No gold, no eternal life, just a lot of health problems. Before you get too comfortable, let's clear something up. Alchemists weren't just crackpots chasing impossible dreams. They were the OG chemists, laying the groundwork for modern chemistry with their experiments. Sure, they had a bit of that medieval hype man flair, promising transformation of lead to gold and cures for any ailment under the sun. But they were also pioneering the study of substances, reactions, and the properties of materials. It was a messy, dangerous business, and it certainly wasn't for the faint-hearted. Now, let's talk about the workshop itself. It's a cluttered mess of flasks, alembics, and crucibles. These tools were essential for the distillation and sublimation processes that alchemists held dear. Your average alchemist would be hunched over a workbench, squinting into a flask of bubbling liquid, trying to discern whether it's about to transform into something miraculous or simply explode. Given the volatile nature of their materials, sulfur, arsenic, lead, explosions were not uncommon. In fact, they were practically a rite of passage. Speaking of sulfur, its pungent odor is practically a permanent fixture in the air. This isn't your mom's kitchen spice rack. Sulfur was a staple for its supposed transformative properties. Combined with mercury, it was believed to hold the key to the alchemical process. It also made the workshop smell like a cross between a rotten egg and a demon's breath, adding a layer of olfactory assault to the already risky business of medieval alchemy. The alchemist, in his tattered robes and soot-stained fingers, is both scientist and showman. He's the medieval equivalent of a snake oil salesman, peddling dreams of wealth and everlasting life. But while he might not deliver on those promises, he's not entirely a fraud. Many alchemists were well-respected scholars, dabbling in philosophy, medicine, and even early forms of psychology. They were the rock stars of their time, albeit with a high mortality rate owing to their exposure to toxic substances. The allure of alchemy wasn't just about the promise of gold or immortality. It was also about unlocking the mysteries of nature, understanding the divine order of the universe. In a world where science and mysticism were often intertwined, alchemy represented a bridge between the tangible and the spiritual. This was a time when people believed that understanding the elements could lead to understanding God himself. But let's not romanticize this too much. The reality was often grim. Alchemists lived on the fringes, financially and socially. Experiments were costly, with ingredients like gold and silver being as expensive then as they are now. Many alchemists relied on the patronage of wealthy nobles, who were more than willing to fund the promise of limitless riches. Of course, when those promises failed to materialize, the consequences could be dire. Alchemists were sometimes accused of fraud or worse, witchcraft. In a world that was quick to blame and slower to understand, the stakes were high. The sun climbs higher, streaming through the workshop's small window, casting a dusty glow over the chaos within. You might start to feel a bit dizzy from the fumes. Did I mention there's no ventilation? And it's only mid-morning. The alchemist, unfazed, continues his work, adding a pinch of something ominous to a boiling concoction. You've got to admire his dedication, if not his health prospects. As you watch him work, you can't help but notice the sheer volume of texts scattered around. Alchemy was as much about study as it was about experimentation. Ancient texts, some dating back to the Greeks, were pored over, copied, and annotated. From Aristotle to Avicenna, the intellectual lineage was a patchwork of philosophy and mysticism. The alchemist's bookshelf is a testament to his role as both a seeker of knowledge and a keeper of secrets. By now, You might be wondering if any of this actually led to anything useful. Well, yes and no. While the philosopher's stone remained as elusive as ever, alchemy did contribute to the development of modern science. Techniques like distillation and the concept of elements were refined through alchemical practices. Not to mention the fact that alchemy's focus on experimentation and observation laid the groundwork for the scientific method. So, while they didn't achieve their loftiest goals, alchemists did help pave the way for future discoveries. As the day wears on, you're probably ready to get out of this hazardous environment and maybe take a shower. Unfortunately, hygiene wasn't exactly a priority in the medieval alchemist's life. Between the pervasive grime and the constant exposure to toxic substances, it's no wonder these guys didn't have a long lifespan. But hey, they lived explosively, if not long. So, there you have it. A day in the life of a medieval alchemist is a whirlwind of ambition, danger, and a fair bit of delusion. It's a world where science and magic collide, where the impossible seems tantalizingly within reach. But beneath the allure lies a gritty reality, one that reminds us that not all that glitters is gold. Sometimes it's just mercury. And now that we've navigated the sulfuric labyrinth of the alchemist's workshop, let's talk about the not-so-shiny side of all this gilded ambition: cold, hard cash. Spoiler alert. Alchemy wasn't a cheap hobby. We're talking about an enterprise where the cost of materials could rival the GDP of a small medieval kingdom. If you think your subscription services are burning a hole in your pocket, imagine trying to fund a quest for the philosopher's stone. These alchemists weren't just playing with mercury and sulfur, oh no. They needed silver, gold, and other costly substances. To put things in perspective, a pound of gold in the 14th century could easily cost you the equivalent of several years' wages for the average worker. Just one bad experiment could literally pour a noble's fortune down the drain, or more likely, blow it up in a colorful, sulfur-scented explosion. Given such staggering expenses, how did alchemists fund their scientific escapades? Enter the medieval equivalent of venture capitalists. Wealthy patrons. These were the noblemen and women who saw alchemy as a potential golden goose, or should I say, golden gander. They were entranced by the dream of limitless wealth, the promise that lead could be transmuted into gold. And who could blame them? In a pre-Bitcoin world, alchemy was the get-rich-quick scheme of choice. This system of patronage wasn't just about money. It was about influence and prestige. Having an alchemist in your employ was like having a cutting-edge tech startup in your portfolio today. It was a status symbol, a statement that you were on the frontier of discovery, dabbling in the divine mysteries of the universe. But unlike today's startups, the return on investment was less about stock options and more about speculative alchemical miracles. Now, let's debunk a common myth. The solitary alchemist hunched over his experiments, isolated and consumed by his work. In reality, successful alchemists were often savvy networkers, more like medieval hustlers than hermits. They had to schmooze their way into the good graces of the aristocracy to secure funding. And if they failed to deliver on their grand promises, well, let's just say a quick exit strategy was essential. Disappointing a powerful patron wasn't just an awkward conversation. It could be a one-way ticket to the dungeon, or worse. Take John Dee, for example, the famed 16th century alchemist and advisor to Queen Elizabeth I. Dee was a master of the alchemical hustle, juggling roles as a mathematician, astrologer, and spy. He kept himself in the game by constantly reinventing his image and securing patronage from the highest echelons of power. His life was a dizzying blend of genuine scholarship and savvy salesmanship, always one step ahead of the skeptics and the gallows. And let's not overlook the economic backdrop that made all this possible. The late medieval period was a time of burgeoning trade, expanding empires, and the early stirrings of capitalism. As economies grew more complex, the allure of alchemy grew stronger. The idea of creating wealth from nothing was intoxicating in an era where the traditional feudal economy was giving way to more dynamic forms of commerce. But here's the rub. For all the money poured into alchemy, the returns were, shall we say, less than golden. Sure, some alchemists made genuine contributions to science, but the philosopher's stone remained as elusive as ever. In the end, many patrons were left with empty coffers and shattered dreams. It was a risky business, and for every alchemist who managed to maintain their patron's favor, many more found themselves out of luck and out of money. Despite this, the romance of alchemy persisted. It was a tantalizing blend of science and mysticism, a field where the impossible seemed just within reach. Even today, the image of the alchemist evokes a sense of wonder, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is often as much about the journey as the destination. So, while they might not have turned lead into gold, alchemists did spin quite a tale, one that continues to captivate our imaginations. As we wrap up this segment, remember, the world of medieval alchemy was as much about the hustle as it was about the science. It was a complex dance of ambition, economics, and the eternal human desire to transcend the ordinary. And while the alchemists' dreams might have been lofty, their feet were always planted in the gritty realities of their time. Stay tuned, because the alchemical adventure is far from over. There's more gold to sift through in the next part of our journey into this fascinating world. Now, let's dive into the bustling social hive that was the medieval alchemist's workshop. You might be picturing a lone, shadowy figure hunched over a bubbling cauldron, but the reality was a far cry from this image of solitary genius. Alchemists were more like the CEOs of a startup lab, surrounded by a motley crew of apprentices, assistants, and sometimes even entire teams of eager learners and hopeful dreamers. It's a bit like a medieval version of a modern tech incubator, minus the ping-pong tables and free kombucha. First off, let's talk about these apprentices. Imagine being a young, budding alchemist in training. Your days would be spent grinding, mixing, and observing, all under the watchful eye of your master. You'd be the one tasked with cleaning up the mercury spills and restocking the supplies of sulfur, all the while hoping to glean some of the master's arcane knowledge. Forget about a cushy internship. This was the gritty, hands-on education of the medieval world, with risks that would make OSHA lose its mind. The apprentices weren't just there to fetch and carry. They were the future of alchemy. They were the ones who would carry on the tradition, hopefully avoiding the more explosive mistakes of their predecessors. It was a dicey career path, but if you played your cards right, you could rise to become a master alchemist yourself, complete with your own workshop, and perhaps even a few apprentices to boss around. Now, why did these workshops have multiple people working together? It's simple. Alchemy was, at its heart, a collaborative science. Sure, the master alchemist might have been the face of the operation, the one who hobnobbed with patrons and wrote the treatises, but it was the collective effort of the whole team that kept the workshop running. Each person had their role, from the lowly apprentice to the more experienced journeyman, all contributing to the great work, or opus magnum, as they like to call it. But let's not sugarcoat this. These workshops could be hotbeds of tension. When you're dealing with volatile substances and even more volatile egos, sparks are bound to fly. The stakes were high, and the pressure to succeed was immense. And then there was the little matter of societal status. Alchemists walked a fine line between being seen as erudite scholars and suspicious sorcerers. One day you might be dining with the nobility, the next you could be ducking accusations of witchcraft faster than you could say abracadabra. The societal status of alchemists was a tightrope act that required a delicate balance. On one hand, they were respected as learned men, often with connections to universities and the intellectual elite. They were the rock stars of their time, blending science with mysticism in a way that captivated the medieval imagination. Their work promised not just material wealth, but spiritual enlightenment, and that was a powerful combination in an era when science and religion were inextricably linked. On the flip side, the very nature of their work also made them targets of suspicion. In an age rife with superstition, the line between science and sorcery was as thin as a strand of spun gold. Alchemists were often accused of dabbling in the dark arts, and the consequences could be severe. Take the case of Thomas Norton, an English alchemist of the 15th century. Despite his scholarly pursuits, he found himself accused of sorcery and spent time in prison. It was a reminder that while alchemy could elevate you to the heights of society, it could also send you plummeting into its dungeons. And it wasn't just the lower ranks who faced such peril. Even high-profile alchemists had their share of scrapes with the law. The famed alchemist and physician Paracelsus, for example, was a man of many talents and many controversies. Known for his unorthodox methods and fiery temper, he found himself at odds with both the medical establishment and the church. Though he avoided any dire consequences, His career was a roller coaster of acclaim and infamy. But why did people take these risks? What made alchemy so alluring that it was worth the danger of being branded a sorcerer? The answer lies in its promise of transformation, not just of metals, but of human potential. In a world where life was often brutal and short, alchemy offered a glimmer of hope, a chance to transcend the ordinary and touch the divine. It was the medieval equivalent of reaching for the stars, a tantalizing dream that kept the fires of ambition burning bright. And so, the alchemist's workshop was not just a place of scientific inquiry, but a crucible of human aspiration. It was where the mundane met the mystical, where the quest for knowledge collided with the harsh realities of medieval life. It was a world of contradictions, where the pursuit of enlightenment could lead to both the light of discovery and the shadows of suspicion. As the sun sets on another day in the alchemist's workshop, the faint glow of candlelight illuminates the faces of those gathered around the workbench. It's a scene of camaraderie and competition, of youthful enthusiasm tempered by the weight of ambition. In this crucible of creativity, the alchemists and their apprentices chase the dream of transformation, ever aware of the fine line they tread between glory and ruin. And speaking of ruin, stick around because we're going to delve deeper into the economic and political pressures that shape the lives of these alchemists. The stakes are about to get even higher, and the game more perilous, as we continue to unravel the mysteries of this fascinating era. Stay tuned, because in the world of alchemy, the next transmutation might just be right around the corner. As the candles flicker in the dim light of the alchemist's workshop, let's delve into the mind-bending mix of science and mysticism that characterized alchemical practices. If you've ever tried sifting through a medieval alchemical text, you know it feels a bit like reading your horoscope through a kaleidoscope after a couple of glasses of wine. Confusing, absolutely. But beneath the arcane symbols and cryptic language, there's a fascinating blend of philosophy, ambition, and a good dose of wishful thinking. Take the Emerald Tablet, for instance. This ancient text is the Rosetta Stone of alchemy, supposedly penned by Hermes Trismegistus. The name itself a hat trick of mystery. It's a mere handful of lines, but oh, the ambition packed into those words. The tablet proclaims the unity of the spiritual and material worlds, hinting at secrets of transmutation and the elusive philosopher's stone. Forget about a step-by-step recipe for gold making. This was more like a cosmic riddle wrapped in a philosophical enigma. The tablet's appeal lay not just in its promise of material wealth, but in its spiritual allure. In a world where religion and science were conjoined twins, it offered a tantalizing glimpse into the divine order. The alchemists believed that by understanding and mastering the elements, they could achieve not just physical transformation, but spiritual enlightenment. Talk about aiming high. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of these alchemical theories. The philosopher's stone, a mythical substance capable of turning base metals into gold and granting immortality, was the holy grail of alchemy. But despite what Harry Potter fans might hope, it was more metaphor than magic. The stone was emblematic of perfection, a symbol of achieving one's highest potential. So, while alchemists might not have found the elixir of eternal life, they were certainly pioneers in the art of self-improvement. To appreciate the alchemist's methods, you need to picture an experimental cocktail of mysticism and proto-science. Picture this. You're an alchemist in a soot-stained robe, armed with Aristotle's theories and an unshakable belief in the four elements: earth, air, fire, and water. Your experiments are as much about intuition and faith as they are about observation and measurement. It's like conducting a chemistry experiment while reading a self-help book and reciting a prayer. Alchemical texts were a curious mix of the practical and the poetic. Take the Book of Secrets by Albertus Magnus, a 13th-century tome that reads like a Pinterest board for medieval scientists. It offers everything from recipes for dyeing cloth to tips on metallurgy. Albertus, a Dominican monk and scholar, was a bridge between the mystical and the empirical, blending religious devotion with a thirst for scientific understanding. His work laid the groundwork for future alchemists, even if it didn't quite solve the mystery of turning lead into gold. But here's where things get tricky. The methods of alchemy were as much about spiritual transformation as they were about physical change. Alchemists believed that by purifying a substance, they could also purify themselves. It's a concept that resonates with the human desire for self-betterment, a medieval version of New Year's resolutions, though significantly more hazardous. Instead of joining a gym, these guys were playing with mercury and sulfur, striving for a metaphysical makeover. Let's bust a myth while we're at it, the idea that alchemy was purely about greed. Sure, the promise of gold was a significant motivator, especially when the alternative was a life of medieval drudgery. But many alchemists were genuinely driven by a quest for knowledge and understanding. They saw their work as a sacred duty, a way to uncover the divine truths of the universe. In a time when science and faith were intertwined, this was their way of reaching for the stars, albeit with a few explosions along the way. It's essential to understand the context in which alchemy flourished. The medieval period was one of great intellectual ferment, with the rediscovery of ancient texts and the rise of universities. This was a time when the boundaries of knowledge were expanding, and alchemy sat at the crossroads of science, philosophy, and religion. Alchemists were the rock stars of this intellectual revolution, pushing the limits of what was known and striving to uncover the mysteries of existence. But let's not get too romantic. The reality of alchemical practice was often messy and dangerous. The pursuit of transformation could lead to disaster, both material and personal. Alchemists risked not just their reputations, but their lives, working with volatile substances in poorly ventilated spaces. And while they might have dreamed of turning lead into gold, more often than not, their efforts resulted in a pile of ash and a cloud of noxious fumes. Then there were the economic pressures. Alchemy was an expensive endeavor, requiring costly materials and the support of wealthy patrons. The stakes were high, and failure could mean not just financial ruin, but accusations of fraud or heresy. In a world where science was a high-stakes game, the alchemist's workshop was both a laboratory and a crucible of ambition. Yet, despite the risks, the allure of alchemy persisted. It was a field where the lines between science and magic blurred, where the impossible seemed tantalizingly within reach. Even today, the image of the alchemist evokes a sense of wonder and curiosity, a reminder of the eternal human desire to transcend the ordinary and achieve the extraordinary. As we wind down this exploration of alchemical practices, keep in mind that while the alchemists might not have found the philosopher's stone, they left a legacy that shaped the course of science. Their work laid the foundation for modern chemistry, introducing concepts and techniques that will be refined and expanded by future generations. They were pioneers in the truest sense, forging a path through the unknown and inspiring generations of seekers to come. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover in the alchemist's quest for transformation. We're just getting started on this journey through the mystical and the scientific, and there are still plenty of mysteries to unravel. Keep your curiosity burning bright, because the world of alchemy is full of surprises, and the next revelation might be just around the corner. So, as we leave behind the smoke and mirrors of medieval alchemy, let's turn our attention to what all that bubbling and boiling actually brought us: the birth of modern chemistry. Spoiler alert, it wasn't an overnight makeover, more like a painstaking evolution that took centuries. Alchemy was the messy, unpredictable teenager that eventually grew up into the precise and methodical adult we know as chemistry. But don't get too nostalgic for the old days of lead-to-gold pipe dreams. This transformation was nothing short of revolutionary. Let's talk numbers. By the 17th century, alchemy's star was fading, but its experiments were hardly in vain. Alchemists bequeathed to the world a treasure trove of techniques, distillation, sublimation, and precipitation to name a few, that became the bedrock of chemical processes. People like Robert Boyle, the 17th century thinker often hailed as the father of modern chemistry, took these rudimentary methods and ran with them. Boyle's law, which describes the inversely proportional relationship between the pressure and volume of a gas, wasn't cooked up in a vacuum. It was the result of a long lineage of alchemical trial and error. Speaking of lineage, let's not forget the paper trail. Alchemists were compulsive note-takers, scribbling down every failed experiment as diligently as the few that succeeded. This tradition of documentation laid a foundation for the scientific method we rely on today. They turned chaos into catalogued chaos, which is a step up by any measure. If you've ever wondered why scientists are obsessed with documenting every sneeze in the lab, You can thank our medieval forebears for turning meticulous record-keeping into a cornerstone of research. And what about the big guns of the Enlightenment? Isaac Newton, the guy who supposedly got bonked on the head by an apple and discovered gravity, was knee-deep in alchemic texts. He spent more time trying to crack the alchemical code than he did on calculus or optics. His private manuscripts reveal that he was as captivated by the promises of alchemy as any starry-eyed medieval enthusiast. Newton saw the universe as a cosmic alchemical puzzle, and while he didn't find the philosopher's stone, he did help lay the groundwork for classical physics. So, next time you drop something and blame gravity, remember that Newton's curiosity about alchemy played a part in that revelation. Now, let's put on our economic goggles for a moment. The transition from alchemy to chemistry wasn't just about scientific advancement. It was also driven by economic necessity. The Industrial Revolution, kicking off in the late 18th century, demanded innovation. Factories needed reliable methods to produce chemicals on a larger scale, and alchemy's slapdash approach just wasn't cutting it. The need for precision and repeatability in chemical processes was more than just a scientific curiosity. It was a financial imperative. Chemistry had to become reliable because economies were depending on it. But let's not get too carried away with the triumph of science over mysticism. The romance of alchemy never truly died. It merely shape-shifted. Even today, the idea of transforming one thing into another, of unlocking hidden potentials, continues to captivate. Ever heard of nanotechnology? It's the modern-day equivalent of alchemical transmutation, promising to revolutionize everything from medicine to manufacturing. The dream of transformation is as alive as ever, just with fewer explosions and more computer modeling. So why does the allure of alchemy linger? It's simple, human nature. We're hardwired to seek magic in the mundane, to believe that there's more to the universe than meets the eye. Alchemy promised not just material wealth, but existential meaning, a notion that still resonates in our quest for knowledge and self-improvement. The idea that we can transcend our limitations, that there's a secret formula to unlock infinite potential, is as intoxicating as a medieval alembic full of mercury, and infinitely safer. But here's a bitter pill to swallow. If you really want a taste of alchemy without the lead poisoning, you're better off attending a modern magic show. At least there, the sleight of hand comes with a guarantee of entertainment rather than a risk of arsenic exposure. Magic shows let us indulge in the fantasy without the hazardous reality, offering a wink and a nod to our enduring fascination with the impossible. So, what do we take away from our foray into the world of medieval alchemy? It's a reminder that progress is a messy, winding road paved with ambition and failure. Alchemy may not have delivered on its grand promises, but it lit a spark that ignited the fires of scientific inquiry. It taught us that the pursuit of knowledge is as much about the journey as the destination, a lesson worth remembering as we navigate our own quests for wisdom. In the end, the alchemist's workshop was more than just a laboratory. It was a crucible of human aspiration and curiosity. It was where dreams collided with reality, where the boundaries of the known world were continually challenged and redefined. And while the alchemists may not have turned lead into gold, they transformed the way we seek to understand our universe. So, as you close the dusty tome on alchemy, remember, the real magic lies not in the secrets we keep, but in the ones we discover. You're standing in the bustling heart of ancient Sparta, a place where the air is thick with the smell of sweat and determination. It's 650 BCE, and the city-state is buzzing with the fervor of an entire society dedicated to the art of war. Welcome to the Agoge, the infamous Spartan training system that's less of a summer camp and more of a boot camp on steroids. Strap in. It's a wild ride. The Agoge wasn't just about sharpening swords and flexing muscles. It was a full-on lifestyle transformation. Think of it as a cross between a military academy and a survival reality show, but with way more stakes. Young boys, starting at the tender age of 7, were stripped from their families faster than you can say childhood trauma, and thrown into a world where crying was about as welcome as a Persian in Sparta. This wasn't some quaint little tradition. It was the backbone of Spartan society. The whole rigmarole kicked off in the 7th century BCE, around the same time as the great poet Tyrtaeus was penning his martial verses, urging Spartans to be brave in battle, no pressure, right? The idea was simple. Create a warrior elite capable of defending the city-state against any threat. And by elite, I mean the kind of soldiers who could make a grown man weep by just looking at him. Now, you might be wondering, how did they keep this engine of discipline and brutality running? Well, it turns out that keeping a bunch of young boys in line and training them to be killing machines isn't cheap. The Spartan state didn't exactly have the luxury of printing money or holding bake sales. Instead, they leaned heavily on a class of people known as the Helots, essentially serfs who did all the farming and heavy lifting while the Spartans focused on perfecting the art of intimidation. To give you an idea of the economic gymnastics involved, each Spartan warrior or hoplite required a hefty amount of resources. They needed equipment, food, and all the other necessities of life, which the Helots so graciously provided, often against their will, mind you. The Helots were taxed, not in coin, but in kind, contributing a significant portion of their agricultural produce to the Spartan coffers. This system allowed the Spartan elite to dedicate their lives to warfare without worrying about little things like food shortages or economic collapse. And what did the agoge entail, you ask? Oh, just a light schedule of military drills, discipline exercises, and the occasional bout of hunger-induced hallucinations. Boys were encouraged to steal their meals to hone their stealth skills, but if caught, they'd be whipped, not for stealing, but for getting caught. Talk about a tough audience. It's no wonder these kids could later withstand the rigors of battle, having survived a childhood that was more Hunger Games than Hogwarts. There's a romantic sheen to the Spartan warrior ethos that's hard to shake off. The notion of a society that valued discipline and martial prowess above all else is intoxicating. But let's not get too misty-eyed here. The reality was a bit more draconian than your average history textbook might let on. These young Spartans weren't just learning how to fight. They were being molded into the very embodiment of state control. The agoge was as much about mental conditioning as it was about physical training. Living conditions in the agoge were, shall we say, Spartan. Boys slept in communal quarters on makeshift beds of reeds, and the concept of personal space was as foreign as a day off. They wore the same tattered cloak year-round, which meant learning to embrace the elements rather than hide from them. This was all part of the plan to toughen them up, to make them impervious to discomfort. After all, a warrior who complains about the cold isn't going to be much use on the battlefield. The Spartan state was meticulous in its approach to funding and managing the agoge. This wasn't some haphazard operation. It was a well-oiled machine, with every cog serving a purpose. The state provided the necessary resources to ensure that the agoge could function without interruption. In return, they gained a standing army of formidable warriors, ready to defend Sparta's interests at a moment's notice. It was a symbiotic relationship, albeit one built on the backs of those who had little choice in the matter. It's easy to get caught up in the glamour of Spartan heroics, the tales of the 300 at Thermopylae, the reverence for discipline and strength, but beneath the glossy veneer lies a harsher truth. The agoge was as much about control and conformity as it was about heroics. It was a system designed to produce not just warriors, but cogs in the Spartan machine. So, as you drift off to sleep, perhaps ponder the paradox of Spartan society, a world where freedom was won through the strictest of constraints, where strength was nurtured through deprivation, and where every warrior was forged in the crucible of the agoge, a system that demanded everything and promised only the chance to serve a society that valued its warriors above all else. As you drift off to sleep, perhaps ponder the paradox of Spartan society, a world where freedom was won through the strictest of constraints, where strength was nurtured through deprivation, and where every warrior was forged in the crucible of the agoge, a system that demanded everything and promised only the chance to serve a society that valued its warriors above all else. Now, let's dive deeper into the nitty-gritty of Spartan initiation rituals, because, trust me, no reality TV show could ever script this level of intensity. For starters, if you thought your high school gym class was rough, wait until you hear about the endurance tests these Spartan lads endured. You see, the agoge wasn't just about building biceps the size of Mount Olympus. It was about transforming boys into men who could endure the most harrowing conditions. By the age of 12, Spartan boys were already seasoned veterans in the art of survival. They were tasked with braving the elements, wearing a single cloak year-round, come snow or sunshine. Forget about a wardrobe change or a cozy blanket on a chilly night. The idea was to harden them, to make them as resilient as the stone walls of their city. But let's not kid ourselves. The piece de resistance of Spartan endurance tests was the crypteia. Picture this, a covert operation that was part survival test, part psychological mind game, and all about asserting dominance over the Helots. Around the age of 18, the most promising Spartan youths were handpicked for this secretive rite of passage. They were sent into the wilderness with nothing but a knife and their wits, tasked with living off the land and, well, instilling a bit of fear in the Helot population. It was a blend of guerrilla warfare training and social control, because what better way to keep your underclass in check than to have your warrior elite lurking in the shadows? It's the kind of logic that makes you wonder if the Spartans were the original masters of psychological warfare. Now, before you start romanticizing this as some noble quest, remember that the reality was far from glamorous. The crypteia wasn't just a game of hide and seek. It was a brutal reminder of the lengths Sparta would go to maintain its iron grip on power. The Helots, who vastly outnumbered the Spartans, were always a potential threat. So, this annual purge was as much about keeping the Helots in line as it was about testing the mettle of Spartan youth. Talk about a trial by fire, or rather, a trial by stealth. As these young warriors skulked through the night, they were honing skills that went beyond the battlefield. They learned to be invisible, to move silently, and perhaps most importantly, to think like a Spartan, a mindset that valued cunning and control. It's a chilling reminder that the Spartan system was about more than just physical prowess. It was a deeply ingrained philosophy that permeated every aspect of life. And just when you think it couldn't get any more intense, let's not forget about the infamous cheese-stealing contest. Yes, you heard that right. In a bizarre twist of tradition, Spartan boys were encouraged to swipe cheese from the altar of Artemis Orthia. Simple, right? Not quite. This was a high-stakes game where the stakes were, quite literally, life and limb. As the boys made their daring dash, older youths armed with whips stood ready to deliver a sound, thrashing to any would-be thief. It was a rite of passage, a test of courage, and perhaps a twisted form of entertainment. Frankly, it's enough to make you rethink your own lactose tolerance. But the question remains, why such harsh methods? What was the logic behind this relentless pursuit of toughness? The answer lies in the very core of Spartan society. Sparta was a city-state perpetually on edge, ever wary of external threats and internal dissent. To them, the ability to endure was synonymous with survival. It wasn't just about building soldiers. It was about crafting citizens who could withstand any hardship without flinching. Yet, despite the harsh realities, there's an undeniable allure to the Spartan narrative. The idea of a society that could produce warriors of such legendary repute is intoxicating, even if the methods were less than savory. The romantic sheen of Spartan heroism, the tales of valor and unyielding discipline, casts a long shadow that continues to captivate our imagination. But beneath that veneer lies a harsh truth. The Spartan way was as much about suppression and control as it was about glory and honor. So, as you ponder the Spartan paradox, consider this. In a world where might was right, where power was maintained through fear and dominance, the cost of creating a warrior elite was paid in the currency of human suffering. It's a sobering reminder that the stories we tell ourselves about strength and heroism often gloss over the sacrifices and struggles that paved the way. In the end, the Spartan system was a finely tuned machine that demanded everything from its participants. It was a world where every action had a purpose, every test a lesson, and every hardship a step towards becoming the ultimate warrior. And while the romantic myths of Spartan grandeur continue to inspire, it's the gritty reality of their endurance that truly defines the legacy of this remarkable society. As we move forward in our exploration of Spartan life, keep in mind the dual nature of their existence, both the legend and the reality, and how each shaped the other in the crucible of history. So, we've got this Spartan machine churning out warriors like an assembly line of ancient badasses, but what was life really like for those poor souls in the Agoge? Let's dive into the gritty details of their daily grind, the kind of stuff that would make even the toughest modern boot camp look like a spa retreat. Picture this. You're a Spartan boy, barely 7 years old, and your childhood has just been outsourced to the state. Welcome to the Agoge, where you'll trade in bedtime stories for battle strategies. Your new home is a barracks filled with peers who are more like frenemies than friends. The social dynamics here, think Lord of the Flies, but with more muscles and less conch-shell diplomacy. It's a place where mentorship and peer relationships form the backbone of survival. Mentorship in the Agoge was crucial, but don't expect any heartwarming Mr. Miyagi moments. Each boy was assigned a mentor, typically a young adult Spartan warrior, who would guide them through the labyrinth of Spartan discipline. These mentors, known as paidonomos, were more drill sergeant than kindly uncle, instilling lessons in combat, strategy, and the not-so-subtle art of obedience. The Spartan system was a well-oiled machine, and every cog, from mentor to mentee, had to function flawlessly. The mentor-mentee relationship wasn't just about combat training. It was a carefully crafted social structure that instilled loyalty and discipline. Loyalty was the glue that held this warrior society together, and it was cultivated through rigorous bonding exercises, like, say, surviving on a diet that would make a medieval peasant feel bloated. This wasn't just about building an army. It was about creating a brotherhood bound by shared hardships and the ever-present threat of a beating if you stepped out of line. But let's not sugarcoat it. The life of a Spartan trainee was no picnic. These young warriors in training were expected to form alliances and gain favor with their peers and superiors, all while navigating a social landscape as treacherous as a minefield. It was a delicate balance between cooperation and competition, trust and treachery. The Agoge was a crucible not just for physical prowess, but for the social acumen needed to thrive in Spartan society. You see, in Sparta, discipline wasn't just a virtue, it was the air they breathed. Every aspect of life in the Agoge was meticulously designed to reinforce the cultural emphasis on discipline. From the communal meals, where you'd better eat fast or risk going hungry, to the relentless physical training, every moment was a lesson in self-control and endurance. Even sleep wasn't sacred. Boys were expected to rise at dawn, ready to tackle the day's challenges with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for a surprise snow day. The discipline drilled into these young Spartans wasn't just about following orders. It was about internalizing a code of conduct that dictated every action. It was a system that rewarded conformity and punished deviation, ensuring that each boy emerged from the Agoge not just as a warrior, but as an embodiment of Spartan values. The end game was to create soldiers who were as predictable and reliable as a sunrise over Mount Taygetus. Now, why did any of this matter? Well, the social dynamics and cultural values instilled in the Agoge had a profound impact on Spartan society. For starters, they created a warrior elite that was fiercely loyal to the state and to each other. In a world where external threats were as common as olive trees, this loyalty was the bedrock of Sparta's military might. It ensured that when push came to shove, every Spartan was willing to lay down their life for their comrades and their city. Moreover, the emphasis on discipline and loyalty wasn't just about keeping the military machine running smoothly. It was about preserving the very fabric of Spartan society. In a culture where the state demanded total devotion, these values were the social currency that kept everything from descending into chaos. It was a delicate balance, a house of cards held together by shared beliefs and the ever-present specter of external and internal threats. In the grand tapestry of Spartan history, the Agoge was more than just a training program. It was a microcosm of Spartan life. It was a place where young boys became men, where the seeds of loyalty and discipline were sown and cultivated. It was a system that demanded everything from its participants, but promised something in return. A place in the pantheon of Spartan heroes, a chance to be remembered not as an individual, but as part of a greater whole. So, as you consider the daily life and social dynamics of these Spartan trainees, ponder the paradox of a society that placed such a high value on individual strength and capability, while simultaneously demanding complete subservience to the collective. It's a reminder that in Sparta, the line between hero and cog was as thin as a helots' chance of freedom. And while the romantic allure of the Spartan warrior continues to captivate, it's the stark reality of their existence that truly defines their legacy. As we continue exploring the Spartan saga, keep in mind the intricate dance between individual and state, freedom and control, that shaped one of history's most fascinating societies. And so, as we journey further into the labyrinthine world of Spartan society, Let's unravel the political cunning behind the Agoge, a system that was as much about maintaining control as it was about forging warriors. You see, Sparta wasn't just a city-state with a penchant for military might. It was a geopolitical chess player with its eyes set on dominance, both within and beyond its borders. The Agoge, with all its grueling tests and harsh realities, was a masterclass in statecraft. On the surface, it molded boys into warriors, but peel back the layers, and you'll find a system designed to exert control over the Helot population. Why was this necessary? Well, here's the kicker. The Helots outnumbered the Spartans by as much as 7-1. Yep, you read that right. Imagine trying to keep a lid on a powder keg that large. The Spartans were essentially a minority elite living in constant fear of a Helot uprising. Their entire society was built on a foundation of control, with the Agoge playing a pivotal role. The constant training and indoctrination ensured that young Spartans were not just warriors, but agents of the state, ever ready to quash any whispers of rebellion with the kind of efficiency that would make a Roman legion blush. Let's not forget the crypteia, the shadowy rite of passage that doubled as a psychological weapon. This wasn't just about testing the mettle of future warriors. It was a strategic maneuver to keep the Helots in check. By sending young Spartans out on covert missions to intimidate the Helots, the state maintained a climate of fear and uncertainty, a classic case of divide and rule, where the threat of violence was as potent as violence itself. But why was Sparta so obsessed with maintaining this iron grip on power? The answer lies in their broader geopolitical strategy. In the cutthroat world of ancient Greece, power was everything. City-states like Athens and Thebes were constantly vying for dominance, and Sparta needed to keep its house in order to remain a key player on the stage. Sparta was strategically located in the Peloponnesian Peninsula, a prime piece of real estate that was both a blessing and a curse. It had fertile lands that were perfect for agriculture, but it was also surrounded by potential rivals. To safeguard its interests, Sparta had to maintain a formidable military presence, and this meant keeping the Helot population under control. The Agoge was the linchpin in this strategy, ensuring a steady supply of disciplined soldiers who could defend the homeland and project Spartan power abroad. Now, let's talk economics, because, surprise, surprise, running a militaristic society doesn't come cheap. Sparta's economy was a peculiar beast, heavily reliant on Helot labor to sustain its military ambitions. With the Helots taking care of the agricultural output, Spartan citizens, those elite warriors we've been talking about, could dedicate themselves entirely to warfare. This division of labor meant that the Spartan state could maintain a standing army capable of responding to threats at a moment's notice. But here's where it gets interesting. While other Greek city-states developed bustling trade economies, Sparta took a different route. They shunned currency and trade, opting instead for a system of communal sharing and state-controlled resources. It was a move that baffled outsiders, but made perfect sense in a society where equality among citizens was paramount and external influences were seen as potential corruptions. In the grand scheme of things, Spartan militarism wasn't just about flexing muscles. It was a calculated response to the geopolitical realities of the time. Sparta's leaders understood that to survive and thrive, they needed to instill a culture of discipline and loyalty that transcended individual desires. The Agoge was the crucible where this culture was forged, producing not just warriors but citizens who embodied the Spartan ethos. So, as you ponder the intricate dance of politics and power in ancient Sparta, consider the paradox they faced. A society that celebrated freedom for its citizens while subjugating others to maintain that freedom. It's a stark reminder of the lengths to which human societies will go to preserve their way of life, even when it means walking a tightrope of moral complexity. As we delve deeper into the Spartan saga, keep in mind that their legacy is as much about the myths they inspired as it is about the harsh truths they lived. The allure of Sparta lies in its contradictions. A society built on strength and discipline, yet haunted by the need to suppress and control. And while we admire their warrior ethos, it's the relentless pursuit of power and order that truly defines their place in history. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the enigma that is Sparta, one layer at a time. And so, the tale of Spartan warriors, a saga as old as your grandmother's favorite bedtime story, marches on. But let's pause and take a look at the legacy these warriors left behind, a blend of brute strength and mythical allure that has inspired everyone from ancient bards to modern filmmakers. It's high time we separated the glossy Hollywood sheen from the gritty reality of Spartan life, where the truth is often a bit more complex than Gerard Butler's abs might suggest. First off, let's address the elephant in the room, the enduring myth of Spartan invincibility. Sure, the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BCE, where 300 Spartans held off a Persian army of thousands, was impressive. But if we're handing out gold stars for participation, it's worth noting that they weren't alone. Around 7,000 other Greeks were in that last stand, including the often overlooked Thespians and Thebans, who stuck it out with their Spartan pals. Yet it's the Spartans who get the lion's share of the glory. Talk about a PR win. The romanticization of the Spartan warrior ethos, where bravery and discipline are the holy grail, has been a staple of popular culture. From the Renaissance, when European nobles saw themselves in the reflection of Spartan valor, to the 21st century's obsession with fitness and warrior culture, the Spartan legacy has been selectively curated to inspire, and at times, to intimidate. Who needs a gym membership when you can just chant, "This is Sparta," while doing squats? But why do we find this narrative so appealing? Perhaps it's the allure of a society that thrived on simplicity and strength, where life was boiled down to the essentials: fight, survive, repeat. In a world where our biggest challenge is choosing the right filter for our Instagram post, there's something tantalizing about the idea of living with such clarity of purpose. However, the historical truth is less Instagrammable. The Spartan way of life was not just about heroics. It was also about systemic oppression, rigid conformity, and a society that lived on the edge of fear: fear of the Helots, fear of outside invasion, and fear of deviation from the norm. Economically speaking, the Spartan system was a house of cards propped up by the labor of the Helots. These were the folks doing the actual heavy lifting, literally, while the Spartans focused on perfecting their bronze stand warrior look. Without the Helots toiling away in the fields, the Spartan state might have crumbled faster than a feeder cheese salad on a hot summer's day. It's a sobering reminder that the glory of Sparta was built on the backs of those who had no choice but to serve. In the political arena, Sparta's fierce reputation as a military powerhouse gave them considerable sway in the Greek world. The Peloponnesian War, 431–404 BCE, in which Sparta and its allies squared off against the Athenian Empire, showcased their might. Yet, despite their victory, the war exposed the limitations of a society that was, quite literally, all brawn and no brains. Sparta's inability to adapt to changing times, coupled with their rigid social structure, ultimately led to their downfall. It turns out that flexing muscles doesn't help much when the real battle is fought with strategy and innovation. Now, let's talk about the endurance of the Spartan myth in modern culture. From the pages of Frank Miller's graphic novel, 300, to video games like Assassin's Creed, Odyssey, the image of the Spartan warrior continues to capture our imagination. But these portrayals often gloss over the harsher realities of Spartan life: the constant surveillance, the absence of individual freedom, and the brutal realities of their training regimen. It's the classic case of wanting the sizzle without the steak. The Spartan legacy also serves as a convenient metaphor for various ideologies. Totalitarian regimes have often looked to Sparta as an example of the perfect state, where the needs of the individual are subjugated to the needs of the collective. Yet, in the same breath, those yearning for freedom and autonomy have drawn inspiration from the Spartans' legendary resistance and discipline. This duality makes Spartan history a Rorschach test for whatever values we choose to project onto it. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into the Agoge and its lasting impact, let's take a moment to reflect on the paradox that is Sparta. A society that celebrated freedom for its citizens while denying it to others. A culture that revered discipline and strength, yet was built on a foundation of fear and control. The allure of Spartan heroism is undeniable, but so is the cost at which it was purchased. In the end, the Spartan legacy is a tale of contrasts, a blend of myth and reality that continues to resonate with us today. It's a reminder that the stories we tell ourselves about strength and heroism are often more complicated than they appear. And perhaps, as you drift off to sleep, ponder the timeless dance between legend and truth and how each shapes our understanding of history. Because if there's one thing we can learn from the Spartans, it's that legacy is as much about the stories we choose to tell as it is about the lives that were lived. In the 7th century, a band of desert nomads went from herding camels and arguing over wells to ruling one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. If that's not an epic plot twist worthy of a Hollywood blockbuster, I don't know what is. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're talking about the Umayyad Caliphate, and their rise wasn't just about waving swords and shouting, Allahu Akbar. They had a lot more going on beneath those flowing desert robes. The Umayyad started out as part of the Quraysh tribe in Mecca, a bustling trade hub nestled in the Arabian Peninsula. Imagine Mecca as the ancient world's equivalent of a freeway service station. Caravans loaded with spices, incense, and silk would stop by, causing a cultural traffic jam where ideas and goods collided. The Umayyads were like the savvy gas station owners, making a tidy profit off the transit and trade, but they weren't just content with counting camels and coins. No, they had their eyes on a much bigger prize. Fast forward to the early 7th century, and the Prophet Muhammad had brought Islam to the Arabian Peninsula, shaking up the status quo like a sandstorm on a calm desert day. After Muhammad's death in 632 CE, the early Muslim community was thrown into a game of political musical chairs, trying to figure out who should lead. The Umayyads waited patiently, like that cunning friend who only jumps into monopoly once all the properties have been bought, and the real estate market is ripe for the taking. By 661 C, the Umayyads, under their leader Muayyad I, had seized control and established the first Islamic dynasty. Muayyad was no fool. He knew that keeping an empire together required more than just military might. It was about diplomacy, tribal alliances, and sometimes just plain old bribery. He moved the capital to Damascus, a city with a history as rich as its vineyards. This shift wasn't just geographical, it was strategic, placing the Caliphate smack dab in the middle of the trade routes between the Mediterranean and the Orient. As the Umayyads flexed their muscles, they turned their gaze north and west, stretching their empire like a contestant in a medieval game of Risk. They had their eyes on the Byzantine and Sasanian empires, both of which were conveniently declining like overripe fruit ready to be plucked. By 750 C, the Umayyad Caliphate's territory spanned from the Iberian Peninsula in the west to the Indus River in the east, covering over 6,000 miles. That's more than the distance from New York to Honolulu, and they did it without the help of Google Maps. Now, before we start thinking these guys were just desert Robin Hoods, liberating lands in the name of Islam, let's inject a dose of reality. Conquest wasn't just about spreading the faith, it was also about cold, hard cash. The Umayyads implemented a tax system that made sure non-Muslims paid a little extra for the privilege of keeping their heads. The jizya tax was a neat little revenue stream that kept the Umayyad coffers brimming. It's like charging a cover fee at a club, except the bouncer is armed and has divine backing. Politically, the Umayyads mastered the art of tribal politics. They knew that the key to maintaining power was keeping the various Arab tribes from each other's throats. Think of it as a giant family reunion where everyone's armed and slightly tipsy. Muayyad and his successors played tribal leaders against one another, ensuring that no single group grew strong enough to challenge the Caliphate's authority. It was a delicate balancing act, like trying to juggle scimitars while riding a camel. Still, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Religious fervor was both a blessing and a curse. The Umayyads were Sunni Muslims, but not everyone in their rapidly expanding empire agreed with their interpretation of Islam. The Shia Muslims, in particular, weren't too thrilled about the Umayyads' rise to power, believing that leadership should stay within the Prophet's family. This led to tensions that simmered like a pot of stew on a low flame, occasionally boiling over into open rebellion. Even with their internal challenges, the Umayyads managed to hold it all together, partly thanks to a string of competent rulers, and let's face it, a fair bit of luck. They had their fair share of missteps, like anyone trying to navigate the tricky waters of empire building, but they kept the ship afloat for nearly a century. Their legacy is a testament to the fact that sometimes the unlikely underdogs can end up rewriting the rules of the game. So, what can we learn from this chapter of history? Well, Besides the fact that you should never underestimate a group of determined desert nomads, it's a reminder that history is as much about chance and circumstance as it is about grand designs. The Umayyads didn't have a master plan to conquer half the known world. They just made the most of the opportunities that came their way. It's a good lesson for anyone, whether you're plotting an empire or just trying to win at your next board game night. But let's not put the cart before the camel, because while the Umayyads might have been the masters of military expansion, keeping the empire's economic wheels rolling was a whole other kettle of fish. Picture trying to finance an empire that sprawled across 3 continents without the luxury of modern banking systems. It's like running a multinational corporation with no Wi-Fi and a ledger made of papyrus. So, how did the Umayyads keep the coffers from running dry? The answer is a fascinating blend of taxes, trade, and good old-fashioned looting. First off, the Umayyads were no strangers to the fine art of taxation. Now, before you start imagining a bunch of caliphs cackling maniacally over piles of gold, let's break down what this actually looked like. The Umayyads inherited a tax system that was already in place in the conquered territories, but they were savvy enough to tweak it to their advantage. The jizya tax was one such innovation, a levy on non-Muslims that was neither random nor arbitrary. It was more like a subscription fee for living under the protection of the empire, and it wasn't insignificant. For instance, in the city of Jericho, the jizya could amount to a hefty sum, sometimes equivalent to a month's wages for a laborer. Talk about a financial burden with divine implications. But it wasn't just the jizya keeping the empire afloat. The Umayyads also collected the kharaj, a land tax that varied depending on the fertility of the land in question. Think of it as a sliding-scale property tax, only instead of a letter from your local council, you got a visit from a tax collector who wasn't exactly known for his patience. The kharaj played a crucial role in the Umayyad economy, particularly in the fertile lands of Egypt and Iraq, where agriculture was the bread and butter, literally, of the empire's wealth. Now, let's talk trade routes, because the Umayyads didn't just sit back and rake in taxes. They were active participants in the global trade network, which at the time was like the Silk Road on steroids. The empire's strategic location allowed it to control key trade routes stretching from China to the Mediterranean. Picture bustling caravans laden with silk, spices, and precious metals, snaking their way across vast deserts and mountainous terrain. The Umayyads collected tolls and taxes on goods passing through their lands, turning the empire into a veritable cash register of the ancient world. Damascus, their capital, became an economic hub, where merchants from across the globe came to haggle and trade. It was like the Wall Street of the 8th century, only with less shouting and more camels. And then there was the occasional plunder. Let's not sugarcoat it. The Umayyads weren't above a bit of good old-fashioned looting. When the opportunity arose, they seized it with both hands. The conquest of Sindh in modern-day Pakistan, for instance, wasn't just about spreading Islam. It was also a highly lucrative venture. The region was famed for its wealth, and the Umayyads made sure to take their fair share. It's a reminder that sometimes the line between holy mission and highway robbery was as thin as a desert breeze. But we need to debunk a persistent myth, the notion that the Umayyad caliphs were living in unimaginable luxury, swimming in gold like Scrooge McDuck. The reality was more complex. Yes, the caliphs and their courts were wealthy, but they weren't hoarding treasure for the sake of it. Much of their wealth was reinvested into the empire, building infrastructure, funding military campaigns, and maintaining the elaborate bureaucracy that kept everything ticking along. Running an empire isn't cheap, and the costs of administration, defense, and public works were staggering. It's like being a landlord with a really, really big property portfolio, where the tenants occasionally try to overthrow you. So, what was the real cost of running an empire that stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian subcontinent? Well, it was an intricate balancing act. The Umayyads had to ensure their subjects felt the benefits of being part of a vast empire, while also keeping the tax collectors happy. It's a testament to their financial acumen that they managed to keep the empire solvent for as long as they did, even if it meant occasionally shaking the money tree a bit too vigorously. Yet, it wasn't all about money and resources. The Umayyads understood the importance of perception. They were masters of public relations long before the term was coined. By maintaining a facade of wealth and power, they projected an image of invincibility. It was a strategic move, designed to deter would-be challengers and reassure their subjects that they were in capable hands. The caliphs knew that sometimes the illusion of wealth was as important as the wealth itself. It's a reminder that in politics, as in magic, what you see isn't always what you get. In the end, the Umayyad's economic engines were a finely tuned machine, fueled by taxes, trade, and a dash of daring. They navigated the economic realities of their time with a shrewdness that would make any modern CEO green with envy. But let's not forget, it was a precarious balance, one that required constant vigilance and a willingness to adapt. Umayyads were many things: warriors, rulers, strategists. But above all, they were survivors in a world where the only constant was change. And just when you thought running an empire on taxes and trade was complicated enough, let's add a little political black magic into the mix. Because governing the Umayyad Caliphate wasn't just about counting coins and collecting jizya. It was about keeping a diverse empire glued together with the political finesse of a master puppeteer. The Umayyads didn't have the luxury of social media to broadcast their decrees or digital surveillance to keep an eye on rebellious provinces. Instead, they relied on a network of governors, tribal alliances, and yes, the occasional strong-arm tactic to hold the sprawling empire together. At the heart of this political machine was the appointment of governors, or wali, who were the Caliphate's boots on the ground. Imagine them as regional managers with a mandate to keep the peace, collect taxes, and, crucially, report back to Damascus. These governors were often chosen for their loyalty to the caliph, which sounds great in theory, but in practice, it was a bit like hiring your cousin to run your multi-million-dollar business. Sure, they might have your back, but they could also make a mess of things if they weren't up to the task. To keep these governors in line, the Umayyads employed a clever system of rotation. No governor stayed in one place long enough to build a personal power base, ensuring they remained more loyal to the caliph than their own ambitions. It's the political equivalent of musical chairs, where if you're not quick on your feet, you're out of the game. This merry-go-round of governors helped prevent any one individual from becoming too entrenched, but it also meant that the empire was in a constant state of flux. Stability, it seems, was more about managing chaos than eliminating it. Now, let's talk about the social fabric of this empire, which was more patchwork quilt than seamless tapestry. The Umayyads ruled over a mosaic of cultures, languages, and religions, each with its own quirks and demands. Persians, Berbers, Egyptians, Syrians, all under one political roof. Managing this cultural cacophony required a deft touch, as well as a willingness to blend coercion with compromise. You could call it diplomacy if you're feeling generous, but often it was more about knowing when to wield the carrot and when to brandish the stick. The Umayyads were astute in leveraging existing structures to maintain control. Take the case of the former Byzantine and Persian territories, where they retained local administrative practices, allowing for a smoother transition of power. In essence, they were like corporate raiders who, instead of dismantling the companies they acquired, opted to keep the existing management team, just with a few new rules and a different business card. Yet, for all their strategic savvy, the Umayyads weren't above using force when diplomacy failed. Rebellions weren't uncommon, and they were dealt with swiftly. The Berber revolt in North Africa, for instance, was quashed with a combination of military might and the promise of tax relief. It's a classic case of both stick and carrot, where the rebels were reminded of the empire's might while being offered an olive branch to reconsider their position. But let's debunk a myth here, the idea that the Umayyads were universally loathed oppressors. In reality, many regions flourished under their rule, benefiting from the stability and economic opportunities brought by the Caliphate. The Umayyads invested in infrastructure, building roads, bridges, and canals, which facilitated trade and communication across the empire. In some areas, they were seen as liberators from the oppressive rule of previous regimes, particularly in regions like Egypt and the Levant, where Byzantine control had been less than benevolent. That said, the Umayyads had an image problem, particularly with the Shia Muslims, who saw them as usurpers of the rightful leadership of Islam. This religious tension simmered beneath the surface, occasionally boiling over into revolts and uprisings. The Shia believed that leadership of the Muslim community should remain within the Prophet Muhammad's family, specifically through his cousin and son-in-law Ali and his descendants. The Umayyads, who were from a different branch of the Quraysh tribe, were viewed as illegitimate rulers, which was a bone of contention that would follow them throughout their reign. Navigating these religious divides required more than just political acumen. It required a keen understanding of the power of symbolism. The Umayyads were masters of this art, often using religious architecture as a means to project their authority. The Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, commissioned by Caliph Abd al-Malik, served not just as a religious monument, but as a statement of Islamic supremacy and Umayyad power. It was the medieval equivalent of planting your flag on the moon, a clear message to both subjects and rivals that the Umayyads were here to stay. However, the Umayyads' reliance on tribal politics was both their strength and Achilles' heel. While tribal affiliations helped them secure power, they also meant the Caliphate was only as strong as its weakest link. The Arab tribes, who had been instrumental in the early conquests, began to grow restless, demanding more power and autonomy. The Umayyads' attempts to centralize control in Damascus only exacerbated these tensions, leading to a growing sense of disenfranchisement among the tribal leaders. It's a reminder that in politics, as in life, the very thing that propels you to the top can also bring you crashing down. As we peel back the layers of the Umayyad political machine, it becomes clear that their rule was a complex dance between power and pragmatism. They were adept at playing the long game, understanding that the key to longevity wasn't just seizing power, but knowing how to wield it effectively. And while they didn't always get it right, their century-long reign is a testament to the fact that sometimes the best way to hold an empire together is to know when to push, when to pull, and when to let go entirely. So, as we wrap up this segment of the story, remember that the Umayyads were more than just conquerors. They were architects of a multi-ethnic empire, juggling the diverse demands of their subjects with a combination of cunning, charisma, and the occasional use of force. It's a tale of ambition and adaptability, a reminder that history is often written not just by the victors, but by those who know how to adapt to the ever-changing tides of fortune. And with that, we've set the stage for the next chapter in this saga, where we'll delve deeper into the cultural and intellectual achievements of the Umayyad Caliphate. Because while they were busy playing the Game of Thrones, they were also laying the foundations for a cultural renaissance that would echo through the corridors of history. But for now, let's leave our desert rulers basking in the glow of their hard-won empire, a testament to the power of ambition tempered by a keen understanding of human nature. While the Umayyads were busy playing the imperial version of Twister, left foot on Damascus, right hand on Cordoba, they were also unwittingly setting the stage for a cultural and intellectual renaissance that would light up the medieval world. Forget the image of the ruthless conqueror for a moment and imagine a realm where libraries were as coveted as fortresses, and scholars were the rock stars of their day. Welcome to the Umayyad era, where knowledge was both a currency and a weapon, and the pursuit of enlightenment was as fierce as the desire for territorial expansion. Let's begin our intellectual odyssey in the House of Wisdom, or rather, its precursor. While the fabled institution of Baghdad would steal the limelight under the Abbasids, the Umayyads were the trailblazers, starting with the libraries of Damascus and Cordoba. These weren't just dusty collections of scrolls. No, sir, they were bustling centers of learning, buzzing with scholars who were out to prove that you could indeed have brains and brawn. Picture the scene. Thinkers from diverse backgrounds gathering like a medieval TED talk, exchanging ideas that would eventually lay the groundwork for everything from algebra to astronomy. The Umayyads didn't just hoard books, they imported them like they were luxury goods. Greek, Persian, and Indian texts found their way onto the shelves, translated into Arabic with the fervor of a binge-watching session. And it wasn't just for show. These translations included works by heavyweights like Aristotle and Ptolemy, whose ideas were dissected, expanded, and sometimes hilariously misinterpreted. But hey, who hasn't gotten a little lost in translation now and then? Now let's address the elephant in the room, the so-called Golden Age. Sure, it sounds like something out of a fairy tale, but reality, as always, was a tad more complex. Yes, there were groundbreaking achievements, but there were also some spectacular flops, like the time an ambitious engineer tried to build a flying machine and ended up with a contraption that barely got off the ground. Today, he'd probably be the subject of a viral meme. The Umayyad Caliphate was also a melting pot of cultures, a testament to the empire's sprawling reach. From the Berbers in North Africa to the Persians in the East, each group brought its own flavor to the cultural stew. This fusion created a vibrant tapestry of art, science, and literature, a testament to the power of diversity long before it became a buzzword. Take, for instance, the field of medicine. The Umayyads were particularly fond of learning from the Greeks, with physicians like Galen being all the rage. Hospitals, known as bimaristans, popped up across the empire, offering treatments that were as advanced as they were eclectic. And let's not forget the pharmacologists, who mixed potions with the precision of a master chef, using herbs and spices that were often worth their weight in gold. It was a time when a prescription could just as easily be a recipe. In the realm of mathematics, the Umayyads had a knack for numbers that went beyond mere bookkeeping. The Indian numeral system made its way to the Caliphate, replacing the cumbersome Roman numerals with the more efficient digits we use today. This wasn't just a tweak, it was a revolution in computation, paving the way for advances in algebra and geometry. The Umayyads were like the original Silicon Valley, only with less tech and more turbans. Astronomy was another field where the Umayyads aimed for the stars, quite literally. They inherited the astronomical traditions of the Greeks and Persians, and then shot for the moon, developing observatories and refining measurements that would guide sailors and astrologers alike. Their understanding of the cosmos wasn't just academic, it was practical, informing everything from navigation to the Islamic calendar. Imagine trying to keep track of Ramadan without a reliable way to chart the lunar cycle. The Umayyads were the celestial cartographers of their day, mapping the heavens with an accuracy that would impress even modern astronomers. But let's not get too starry-eyed. For every brilliant breakthrough, there was a theory that missed the mark. Remember those early attempts at alchemy, where scholars tried to turn base metals into gold? Spoiler alert, it didn't work. But out of those experiments came the early foundations of chemistry, proving that even failure can be the mother of invention. The Umayyads were learning in real time, with every mishap serving as a stepping stone to greater understanding. Culturally, the Umayyads were the trendsetters of the medieval world. Their architecture was a blend of practicality and grandeur, with the Great Mosque of Damascus standing as a testament to their vision. This wasn't just a place of worship. It was a statement of power and piety, with intricate mosaics and soaring minarets that declared the Caliphate's sophistication to the world. The mosque became a blueprint for Islamic architecture, influencing designs from Cairo to Cordoba. On the artistic front, the Umayyads had a thing for calligraphy, elevating it to an art form that adorned everything from the Quran to everyday items. It was the medieval equivalent of branding, and the Umayyads knew how to make an impression. Their patronage of the arts wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about crafting an identity, a cultural legacy that would endure long after their empire had faded. However, the reality behind this cultural flourishing wasn't all roses and poetry. The Umayyads were keenly aware that culture was a tool of power, a means to unify their diverse empire and legitimize their rule. By promoting a shared cultural narrative, they crafted a sense of belonging that transcended tribal affiliations. It was an early example of soft power, where influence was wielded not through force, but through shared ideals and achievements. Yet, for all their achievements, the Umayyads couldn't entirely escape the shadows of internal strife and external pressures. Their cultural initiatives were as much about survival as they were about enlightenment, a way to placate restless subjects and fend off rivals. The empire's cultural endeavors were a balancing act, an attempt to maintain unity in a realm that was as fractious as it was vast. As we delve deeper into the Umayyad legacy, it's clear that their pursuit of knowledge was more than just an intellectual exercise. It was an essential part of their strategy, a way to harness the empire's vast resources and diverse peoples. This era wasn't just about dusty tomes and scholarly debates. It was about the transformative power of ideas, the belief that knowledge could be as potent as any sword. And so, as we prepare to explore the final chapter of the Umayyad saga, let's remember that this was an empire of contrasts, a place where ambition met adversity, where grand visions were tempered by harsh realities. The Umayyads were more than just rulers. They were architects of a cultural renaissance that laid the foundations for the world we know today. Their legacy is a reminder that while empires may rise and fall, the pursuit of knowledge endures, lighting the way for future generations. But for now, let's leave the Umayyads in their moment of glory, poised at the brink of both brilliance and oblivion, as the sands of time continue to shift beneath their feet. And so, as we leave the Umayyads basking in the glow of their intellectual achievements, let's pivot to the other side of the coin. Their downfall, a gripping tale of overreach, internal strife, and the kind of betrayal that would give any soap opera a run for its money. Because while the Umayyads were busy laying cultural foundations, they were also sowing the seeds of their own demise. It's like hosting a lavish party while termites quietly munch away at the floorboards. Seems grand until you suddenly find yourself knee-deep in a catastrophe. By the mid-8th century, the Umayyad Caliphate was stretched so thin, it was practically transparent. Picture a rubber band pulled to its limit. One more tug and snap. The empire's rapid expansion was both its strength and its Achilles heel. You see, conquering land is one thing, governing it is quite another. The larger the empire grew, the more unwieldy it became. Communication lagged, local governors acted like mini-caliphs, and the central authority in Damascus was starting to feel like a distant echo. It's the classic issue of an empire biting off more than it could chew, and then choking on the consequences. The internal dynamics weren't any less combustible. Tribal tensions, which the Umayyads had managed to keep under wraps for decades, began to bubble over. The Arab tribes, those same fierce warriors who'd helped build the empire, now felt sidelined and underappreciated. Imagine a family reunion where everyone's forgotten to invite the favorite cousin. That's a recipe for resentment if there ever was one. Meanwhile, non-Arab Muslims, or Mawali, were growing increasingly disgruntled with their second-class status. Despite converting to Islam, they found themselves excluded from the inner circles of power. Their frustration was the kindling for what would soon be a raging fire. Enter the Abbasids, stage left. This rival clan was waiting in the wings with a carefully crafted narrative that promised a more inclusive regime. They capitalized on the growing discontent, rallying the disaffected Mawali and Shia Muslims who had long been at odds with the sunny Umayyads. It was a masterstroke of political maneuvering. Promise everyone a piece of the pie, and suddenly you've got an army of bakers ready to roll out the dough. Under the leadership of Abu Muslim, the Abbasids launched a revolution that would make even the most seasoned rebel leader nod in approval. The decisive blow came in 750 CE at the Battle of the Zab. It wasn't just a military defeat for the Umayyads. It was the kind of existential crisis that makes you question your life choices. With their armies shattered, the Umayyad Caliph Marwan Roman II made a desperate dash for Egypt, but he was caught and unceremoniously dispatched. The Abbasids were quick to mop up the remnants, hunting down Umayyad loyalists with the efficiency of a medieval SWAT team. It was an empire-wide game of hide and seek, and the Umayyads were losing. But here's where the story takes a cinematic twist. Abd al-Rahman, a young Umayyad prince, managed to escape the bloody purge, fleeing to the Iberian Peninsula. There, he established the Emirate of Cordoba, a bastion of Umayyad rule that would endure as a cultural beacon even as the Abbasids took the reins in the east. Talk about a comeback worthy of a Netflix series. His flight and subsequent rise were a testament to the resilience that had characterized the Umayyads from the start. While the dynasty's grip on the Caliphate was lost, their legacy was far from extinguished. So, what lessons can we glean from the Umayyad saga, besides the obvious, don't overextend your empire? For one, it underscores the importance of inclusivity in governance. The Umayyads' failure to integrate non-Arabs into the fold was a critical misstep, one that ultimately gave their rivals the leverage needed to topple them. It's a lesson that echoes through the ages. Ignore the voices of the marginalized, and you might just find them at the gates with pitchforks and torches. Moreover, the tale of the Umayyads serves as a reminder that empires, much like the people who build them, are mortal. Their grandeur and power are fleeting, susceptible to the same forces of change and decay that govern all human endeavors. It's a humbling thought, one that should give pause to any modern power teetering on the brink of hubris. The Umayyads, for all their achievements, were ultimately undone by the very forces they had unleashed: ambition, expansion, and the relentless march of history. In today's world, the echoes of the Umayyad legacy can still be heard. Their cultural and intellectual contributions laid the groundwork for the Islamic Golden Age, influencing everything from architecture to astronomy. The architectural marvels of their time, like the Great Mosque of Cordoba, continue to inspire awe and admiration. Meanwhile, the political narratives they navigated, of power, identity, and inclusion, remain remarkably relevant in our own era of global interconnectedness and cultural blending. As we close the book on the Umayyads, let's remember them not just as conquerors or rulers, but as architects of a world that dared to dream beyond the horizon. Their story is a tapestry of triumphs and tragedies, a reminder that the pursuit of greatness is a double-edged sword. It's a tale as old as time, one that continues to unfold, and if history has taught us anything, it's that the sands of time are ever shifting, reshaping the world in ways both wondrous and unpredictable. The Umayyads may have fallen, but their legacy endures, a testament to the enduring power of human ambition and the unquenchable thirst for knowledge. You're standing knee-deep in a medieval swamp, clutching a bucket in one hand and a bewildering sense of regret in the other. Welcome to your thrilling new career as a leech collector, a job that really put the U in lucrative employment during the Middle Ages. Forget any romantic notion of gallant knights or damsels in distress. You're the unsung hero no one asked for, sloshing through the muck to wrangle bloodsuckers for the medical industry. Now, let's talk about the tools of your trade. You've got your trusty wooden bucket, a pair of grim, calloused hands, and hopefully some thick leather boots. Otherwise, you're basically a walking buffet for the very creatures you're trying to capture. And these aren't your garden variety leeches. No, these are Gerudo medicinales, the medieval superstar of bloodletting, a practice that was about as scientifically sound as using horoscopes to pick your next monarch. The idea behind this charmingly medieval method was to balance the humors, the bodily fluids thought to influence health and temperament. Bloodletting was the medieval cure-all, kind of like a one-size-fits-all sweater that only fits if you slice off a few limbs first. People believed that removing excess blood could cure anything from fevers to flatulence. And who was going to argue? After all, this was an era where sneezing was considered a possible sign of demonic possession. The work environment, let's just say it's not exactly 5-star. You're up to your ankles in mud, surrounded by buzzing mosquitoes that are probably plotting a hostile takeover of your face. The air is filled with the kind of smell that makes you question your life choices more than any philosophical debate ever could. It's a bit like being a rock star, except the groupies are bloodthirsty parasites, and the stage is a soggy marsh. So why, you might wonder, is this job even a thing? Well, medieval medicine had a voracious appetite for leeches, and you're the unfortunate soul tasked with satisfying it. A single doctor might go through hundreds of leeches in a year, and with a price tag of about 2 pennies per leech, a small fortune when a loaf of bread cost about a penny, you could theoretically earn a decent living. That is, if you didn't mind spending your days as a human pincushion. In the grand scheme of medieval careers, being a leech collector was like being the unpopular kid at the job fair. You weren't quite as indispensable as the blacksmith or as revered as the knight. But you did have decent job security, assuming you didn't get sucked dry in the line of duty. Compared to other jobs, like being a gong farmer, a glamorous title for someone who cleared out human waste. You might even consider yourself lucky if you squinted, tilted your head, and had a particularly optimistic disposition. The economy of the Middle Ages was a curious beast, a patchwork quilt of feudal obligations and emerging market systems. Your average leech collector was part of this evolving landscape, contributing to the bustling trade of medical supplies. While a skilled artisan might earn around 6 pennies a day, you were dealing with a more unpredictable income. It wasn't like you could stroll into a swamp and demand the leeches dance into your bucket. Nature had its own timeline, and sometimes it just wasn't your day. Plus, you had to contend with the competition. Imagine a gathering of medieval entrepreneurs, all vying for the same slimy prize. Some might have even tried to poach your territory, because what's a little corporate espionage between friends, right? The turf wars could get intense, but mostly they were just a lot of grumbling and side-eyeing. After all, it's hard to throw a punch when your arms are full of squirming leeches. As you wade through this medieval mire, you can take solace in the fact that the world needs you, even if it doesn't necessarily want to admit it. Without you, the medieval medical machine would grind to a sluggish halt. You're the secret cog in the wheel, the unsung hero in the shadows of history. And while you might not earn your place in the annals of time, you can at least rest easy knowing that somewhere, a medieval doctor is overcharging a patient for your hard-earned harvest. And there you are, slogging through the mire with your bucket of leeches like some medieval version of door-to-door sales, but for bloodsuckers. It's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it. So why exactly are these squirmy little creatures so in demand? To answer that, we've got to dive headfirst into the bonkers world of medieval medicine, where leeches were the superstar treatment, hailed as much for their slimy charm as for their supposed health benefits. Enter the Compendium of Medicine by Gilbertus Anglicus, a medieval medical text that could be best described as Google for medieval doctors. It was a hefty tome, packed with all the wisdom of the time, which is to say it was roughly 10% observation and 90% wild speculation. Bloodletting was one of its star attractions, endorsed by Anglicus and many of his contemporaries. The logic, balance those bodily humours. You see, medieval folks believed that health was all about keeping your bodily fluids in harmony, like some kind of internal Game of Thrones. Too much blood. Time to call in the leeches before your internal politics went haywire. The belief in bloodletting was so entrenched that questioning it would be like questioning why we use Wi-Fi today. You just didn't do it. It was the medieval equivalent of hitting refresh on your browser. Something wasn't right. Just bleed it out and hope for the best. Fever, bloodletting. Headache, bloodletting. Stubbed your toe. You guessed it, more bloodletting. And while the practice might seem about as scientifically sound as using a magic 8-ball to diagnose a computer virus today, it was the done thing. After all, this was an era when the average life expectancy barely scraped 30, so you might as well try anything. But let's not ignore the elephant in the room, the church. Oh, the church. Not just a spiritual guide, but a political powerhouse that shaped everything from the laws of the land to the leeching of your veins. If the church said bloodletting was divine, then by all means, pass the leeches. Religious influence was so potent that it could dictate the medical practices of the day, turning doctors into devout practitioners of faith-based medicine. The church had a vested interest in maintaining control over medical practices, which meant leeches and bloodletting became part of the holy order of things. Now, there's a certain romanticism in imagining a world where leeches were the go-to-cure-all. Picture it, a doctor, robed and wise-looking, prescribing a treatment that involved nothing more than a few wriggling creatures and a prayer. Yet beneath the surface, the reality was far less glamorous. The practice was as much about guesswork and spiritual belief as it was about any proven efficacy. It was a time when the placebo effect might have been the most reliable form of medicine, and the church's endorsement only added a layer of divine legitimacy to what was essentially medieval trial and error. So, while our dear leech collectors were out there ensuring a steady supply of the wriggly wonders, the doctors were busy applying them to every ailment under the sun, convinced of their miraculous benefits. But did it actually work? Well, that's a bit like asking if medieval knights really had dragons for pets. It's mostly fantasy with a sprinkle of reality. In truth, any benefits from bloodletting were probably coincidental rather than causal, but that didn't stop it from becoming as entrenched in the medical world as stethoscopes are today. And so, with every leech you collected, you were not just contributing to the medical practices of the day, but also to the complex tapestry of medieval society, where faith, medicine, and economics were all intertwined in a dance as unpredictable as the medieval weather. As you trudged through the swamp, you were part of a system that was just as much about maintaining the status quo as it was about curing the sick. You were, in your own way, a little cog in a much larger machine, a machine driven by belief as much as by necessity. In the end, it's a story of contrasts, the mystical allure of medieval medicine against the gritty reality of leech-collecting life. It's a world where the romance of faith and the harshness of fact collide in a swampy mess, much like your daily work environment. And as you gather your harvest of leeches, remember that you're part of a legacy that's as fascinating as it is foul, a reminder that history is often stranger and more complex than we dare to imagine. And while you're busy navigating this medieval swamp, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of how you actually catch those slippery little buggers. Spoiler alert, it's not as simple as sticking a bucket in the water and yelling, "Here, Leechy. No, the fine art of leech collection requires a certain finesse, and by that, I mean a willingness to risk life and limb, or at least a few pints of your own blood. First off, you're looking for the right kind of real estate. Think of it as medieval swamp-front property. The best leech hunting grounds were typically found in the wetlands of England, Ireland, and parts of France. Places like the marshes of Somerset or the bogs of Ireland were prime leech territory. It's a bit like hunting for truffles, but replace the trained pigs with your own 2 feet and a healthy dose of desperation. Once you've found your chosen marsh, it's time to suit up. Forget about protective gear. You're more likely to be wearing little more than a tunic and perhaps some makeshift leggings. After all, medieval fashion wasn't exactly big on practicality. You'd wade into the muck, the water sloshing around your legs, while trying not to think about what else might be sharing your watery workspace. The technique? Well, it's a bit of a kamikaze mission. Leeches are attracted to the warmth and movement of your body, which means they'll happily latch onto your skin if given the chance. Some collectors would let the leeches attach themselves and then gently pluck them off and into the bucket. Others might use sticks or their bare hands to scoop them up, a method that was as effective as it was gross. And let's not forget the competition. Other collectors were lurking about, ready to claim the best spots. There's a historical account from a 13th century manuscript where 2 collectors reportedly got into a shouting match over who had the rights to a particularly juicy section of swamp. It's like a medieval gold rush, except the gold is slimy and has a tendency to bite. But the challenges don't stop with the leeches themselves. Travel distances were another thorn in your side. A collector might have to trek miles from their village to their chosen marshland, often relying on little more than a donkey and a prayer to see them through. And with medieval roads being what they were, namely non-existent, this was no small feat. It's not like you could just hop on a medieval Uber and call it a day. Once you'd filled your bucket, it was time to haul your wriggling bounty back to the nearest market or apothecary. But transporting live leeches was tricky business. They needed to be kept moist and cool, which meant stopping frequently to dunk your bucket in fresh water. Think of it as a medieval version of traveling with a goldfish, except your fish are bloodsuckers with a penchant for escape attempts. And why endure all this? Because at the end of the day, those leeches were your ticket to a better life, or at least a less miserable one. The demand was huge, and a skilled collector could turn a decent profit, assuming they managed to avoid bleeding out in the process. And while you might not get rich, you could at least afford the basics: food, shelter, and maybe a pint of ale to drown your sorrows. Of course, there's no denying the romance of it all. There's a certain allure to this image of the lone leech collector, trudging through the misty marshes at dawn, a silhouette against the rising sun. But peel back the layers, and you're left with the gritty reality: wet feet, aching muscles, and a gnawing hunger that never quite goes away. It's a hard life, but for all its hardships, it's also a life on the edge of history, a life that's as much about survival as it is about the slimy little creatures you collect. In the grand tapestry of medieval society, the leech collector is a small yet crucial thread. You're part of a world where every job, no matter how grim, has its place. And as you stand there, ankle-deep in muck, you can take a strange sort of pride in knowing you're keeping the medieval medical machine chugging along. You're not just collecting leeches. You're collecting stories, experiences, and maybe, if you're lucky, a few extra pennies to line your pockets. So there you have it, the life of a leech collector in all its swampy, blood-sucking glory. It's a tale that's as fascinating as it is foul, a reminder that history isn't always glorious battles and noble quests. Sometimes it's just about trudging through the mud, doing the best you can with what you've got, and maybe, just maybe, finding a little light in the murk. And as you prepare for another day in the swamp, remember that you're part of a story that's far bigger than any one person, a story that's as rich and complex as the medieval world itself. And just when you think you've gotten the hang of wrangling those slippery little bloodsuckers, it's time to navigate the bizarre and bustling medieval market that transforms your swampy harvest into cold, hard cash, or more accurately, into a few pennies that smell faintly of swamp. So, who exactly is buying these leeches, and where do they end up? Well, grab your bucket, and let's wade into the murky waters of medieval commerce. First in line at the Leech Bazaar are the apothecaries, the medieval equivalent of your neighborhood pharmacist, though instead of neat rows of pill bottles, They've got shelves packed with dried herbs, dusty tomes, and of course, jars of squirming leeches. These folks are your primary customers, eager to stock up on the latest in bloodletting technology. Apothecaries were the alchemists of everyday life, mixing potions and remedies with the confidence of someone who's never had to worry about pesky things like clinical trials. Now, let's talk economics. The going rate for a leech was about 2 pennies, which might sound like pocket change. But remember, this was a time when a penny could buy you a loaf of bread or a pint of ale, essentially the medieval version of life's essentials. But before you start dreaming about swimming in a Scrooge McDuck-style vault of pennies, consider this. A single doctor could use hundreds of leeches in a year, but the profit margins were tighter than a knight's cardpiece. By the time your leeches had made their way from the marsh to the market, they'd been through quite the journey. Collectors like you might sell your haul to a middleman, who then transport them to the nearest town. Here's where things get interesting. Leeches were a bit like medieval avocados, highly perishable and prone to going bad if not handled just right. They needed to be kept alive, which meant constant care and attention and a steady supply of fresh water. It's a wonder anyone managed to make a profit at all. So, what's in it for the apothecaries? Well, they marked up those leeches like they were gourmet delicacies. A doctor might pay 4 pennies per leech from an apothecary, doubling the price you received. It's like the ultimate game of telephone, with each player in the supply chain adding a little something for their trouble. The apothecaries, in turn, sold these to doctors and healers who were more than happy to pay a premium for what they believed was a miracle cure. It was a neat little ecosystem, albeit one that relied heavily on the medieval equivalent of alternative facts. Now, let's tackle the myth of the leech collector as a medieval mogul. Sure, in theory, you could make a decent living, but the reality was a bit more, shall we say, slimy. After a long day of collecting, you'd return home with your bucket, pockets lighter than your conscience after a questionable life choice. Consider this. Even if you collected 100 leeches in a day, assuming you didn't faint from blood loss, you'd only make about 200 pennies, or roughly £1 in today's money. Not exactly a king's ransom, especially when you factor in the cost of living, which, in medieval terms, included little luxuries like bread, beer, and not dying of exposure. And let's not forget the societal status, or lack thereof. In the grand hierarchy of medieval professions, leech collectors were somewhere between rat catchers and gravediggers. While not quite as reviled as a tax collector, you weren't exactly the toast of the town either. If you were lucky, your neighbors might have appreciated your efforts to keep them healthy, or at least less likely to keel over mid-feast. But there was a certain romantic appeal to the job, a rugged independence that was hard to come by in an age of serfdom and feudal duty. You were your own boss, albeit one with a workforce that consisted entirely of creatures that wanted to suck your blood. You could take pride in the fact that your work was vital, even if most people didn't know your name. After all, without you, the whole leech-based medical economy would crumble faster than a poorly baked medieval pie. And here's the kicker. The demand for leeches wasn't just local. These slimy little medics were shipped far and wide, spreading their dubious healing powers across Europe. In fact, during the 19th century, France alone imported around 30 million leeches annually. Talk about a thriving export market. While that's a bit later than our medieval tale, it's a testament to the enduring allure of these wriggling wonders. So, what do we make of this leech-driven economy? It's a curious mix of desperation and innovation, a system that thrived on the belief that leeches were the cure for whatever ailed you. For every collector slogging through the mud, there were apothecaries and doctors turning a tidy profit, all while the general populace clung to the hope that a few well-placed bloodsuckers might be the difference between life and death. In the end, it's a story as much about human nature as it is about economics. It's about our desire to find solutions, however improbable, and the lengths we'll go to in the pursuit of health and healing. And for all the grit and grime of life as a leech collector, there's a strange kind of dignity in it, a testament to the idea that every job, no matter how humble, has its place in the grand tapestry of history. So, as you haul your squirming cargo to market, remember that you're part of a tradition as old as medicine itself, a tradition that's equal parts science and superstition, commerce and necessity. And as you count your meager earnings, take pride in the fact that you're not just collecting leeches. You're collecting stories, adding your own chapter to the ever-evolving saga of human endeavor. And now that you've wrangled your squirming cargo to market, it's time to reflect on how leech collecting slowly faded into the mist alongside alchemy and witch hunts. As medical science evolved, the demand for these little vampires waned faster than a medieval peasant at the sight of a tax collector. Enter the Renaissance, with its snazzy new gadgets and a growing interest in anatomy that didn't involve peeling off layers of bloodsuckers. The decline of leech collecting wasn't just about doctors swapping leeches for stethoscopes. It was the dawning of the Enlightenment, a time when thinkers like Paracelsus dared to suggest that, hey, maybe bloodletting wasn't the medical panacea everyone thought it was. Around the 17th century, folks started leaning toward more evidence-based practices. Imagine that. And leeches found themselves with an existential crisis. By the 19th century, a Frenchman named Pierre-Louis took a closer look at the numbers and declared bloodletting about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. With the backing of actual data, the medical community began to rethink its love affair with our slippery friends. Leeches weren't quite ready to hang up their tiny hats, though. They enjoyed a brief comeback in the 1830, but as antiseptics and anesthesia rolled onto the scene, leeches quietly slipped into semi-retirement, making the occasional cameo in niche medical practices. Now, what about the societal beliefs that held leeching in such high regard for so long? Well, back when diseases were thought to be caused by everything from miasmas to malevolent spirits, leeches provided a tangible, reassuring treatment. You could see them work, however misguidedly, and that was a comfort. But as germ theory took the stage and microscopes unveiled a whole microbial universe, the public's appetite for leechy remedies dwindled. It turns out, a century of scientific investigation can do wonders for clearing up misconceptions about health. So, where does that leave our medieval leech collector? If you could pluck them from the past and plonk them down in a modern hospital, they'd probably be as bewildered as a cat in a washing machine. Imagine trying to explain MRIs or antibiotics to someone whose career hinged on the efficacy of a swamp-dwelling parasite. Yet, there's a certain charm in the idea. Perhaps they'd be proud to see how far humanity has come, even if it meant their own obsolescence. In this age of robotic surgeries and genetic engineering, the idea of leech therapy might seem like a relic, but lest we forget, history tends to operate in cycles. Believe it or not, some modern medicine still uses leeches, albeit in a more refined capacity. These days, they're employed in microsurgeries to reduce blood clots and promote circulation, proving that even in the age of science fiction-level tech, a little piece of the past still wiggles its way into our lives. Reflecting on this, we see the legacy of leech collecting is not just in the annals of medical history, but also in the broader story of human progress. It's a testament to our perpetual quest for healing, even when our methods were more stab in the dark than precision instrument. And as we look back on this squelchy chapter of history, we're reminded of the importance of questioning the status quo, because today's medical breakthrough could be tomorrow's medieval medicine. And there you have it, folks. From swamp-stomping collectors to the hallowed halls of modern medicine, leeches have journeyed through history like the world's least likely underdogs. So next time you feel squeamish about a modern medical procedure, just remember, at least it doesn't involve a bucket and a bog. Mediterranean, see, that's basically the world's oldest superhighway, was once the stomping ground of some of the most daring navigators ever to grace the waves. Enter the Phoenicians. These folks from around 1500 BCE, hailing from what we now call Lebanon, had a reputation for being the FedEx of the ancient world. Imagine a time when most civilizations treated the sea like a moody cat, unpredictable, mysterious, often best avoided. Yet, the Phoenicians dove in head first, charting courses and building trade networks that would make any modern logistics company green with envy. These seafaring masterminds weren't just about the thrill of the voyage, though. Sure, the romance of the open sea is enticing. A salty breeze, the call of the gulls, the thrill of discovery. But the Phoenicians were less about poetic strolls on the beach and more about cold, hard economic strategy. They were the ones who turned the Mediterranean into a bustling trade hub, connecting distant lands with their expertly crafted ships that zipped across the waters like ancient speedboats. These ships were no mere floating rafts. Picture something akin to a sleek, ancient yacht, complete with the latest in Bronze Age nautical technology. They crafted these vessels from the famed cedars of Lebanon, a wood so prized it was practically the Ferrari of its time. With this buoyant resource, they constructed ships that could withstand the temperamental moods of the sea and the occasional pirate party crashes. But let's get one thing clear. The Phoenicians weren't just wide-eyed wanderers drifting aimlessly from port to port. They were savvy entrepreneurs, with a nose for opportunity sharper than a shark's sense of smell. They weren't just trading the usual suspects like olive oil and wine. No, they had a monopoly on purple dye, derived from the murex snail, and this dye was the ancient equivalent of a designer label. If you were wearing Tyrian purple, you were announcing to the world that you had arrived, and probably on a very well-made ship. Now, let's talk numbers. The Phoenician city of Tyre was the birthplace of this purple gold rush, with murex snails practically oozing out of the coastline. The dye was so precious that it took roughly 10,000 snails to produce just 1 gram. And they say luxury is dead. The trade of this dye inflated the Phoenicians' coffers and turned Tyre into one of the most dazzling cities of the ancient world, with wealth that put them in the league of the great powers of the time. But what about the people behind this economic juggernaut? The Phoenician society was as layered as a well-baked baklava. At the top of the social pyramid were the merchant elites, the ones who really ran the show. These were the power brokers, the ones who could navigate both the high seas and the political waters with equal dexterity. Beneath them were the craftsmen and artisans, the unsung heroes who turned raw materials into coveted goods. The laborers and sailors, often overlooked, were the backbone of this maritime empire, though they rarely got the glory or the gold. This social structure wasn't just a random assortment of roles. It was a finely tuned machine, each part crucial to the Phoenicians' success. The merchants needed the craftsmen to create goods worth trading. The sailors braved the waves to transport these treasures to eager buyers across the sea. It was a complex dance of economics and social order, one that kept the Phoenicians a step ahead of their neighbors. Despite their success, the Phoenicians remain a bit of an enigma. Their own writings are scarce, leaving us to piece together their story from the perspectives of others, often their rivals. This has led to a romanticized image of the Phoenicians as intrepid adventurers, when in reality they were strategic and, dare I say, a bit cutthroat in their business dealings. They played the long game, establishing colonies as far away as Carthage in North Africa, which later became a powerhouse in its own right, much to the chagrin of Rome. So, next time you hear about the Phoenicians, remember, they weren't just daring sailors with a penchant for purple. They were the architects of a trading empire, a society that mastered the art of the deal long before it became a catchphrase. They understood that the sea was not just a barrier, but a bridge that carried them to economic heights and historical significance. And if that's not worth a toast with some ancient Tyrian wine, I don't know what is. So, now that we've toasted with Tyrian wine, let's dig into the nitty-gritty of those who raised their glasses in Phoenician society. Picture an ancient corporate pyramid, but instead of cubicles and corner offices, it's bustling ports and workshops. At the top, we've got the merchant elites. These folks weren't just your average traders. They were the rock stars of the ancient world, minus the leather pants and questionable hairstyles. They controlled the trade routes and, more importantly, the flow of money. Money, by the way, was not coins in those days, but rather a mishmash of goods, services, and the occasional weighty ingot of silver or gold. These elites formed a kind of oligarchic board of directors. Think of them as the Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk of Phoenicia, but with more purple dye and fewer tweets. They were the ones making the deals, setting up colonies, and ensuring that the pecking order remained firmly in their favor. Their wealth was the linchpin of their power, allowing them to influence politics not just locally, but across the Mediterranean. It's a bit like playing a very high-stakes game of Monopoly, where the board reaches all the way from Cyprus to Spain. Below them on this societal ladder were the merchants and craftsmen. These were the middle managers and skilled workers who kept the economic engine humming. The merchants were the savvy negotiators, the ones who could haggle their way through markets from Egypt to Italy. They had to have a head for numbers and a knack for languages, since they were dealing with a melting pot of cultures. They weren't just selling goods, they were selling an experience, a connection to the wider world, and they were incredibly good at it. Craftsmen, On the other hand, were the true artisans. These were the people behind the scenes, the ones turning raw materials into the kind of luxury items that kept the elite decked out in the latest Phoenician fashion. They worked with everything from metal and glass to the infamous purple dye, creating goods that were as beautiful as they were functional. These artisans were crucial, because without them, the merchants would have nothing to sell. It's a classic case of supply and demand, and the Phoenicians had it down to an art form. But let's not forget the laborers and sailors. These were the unsung heroes, the grunts in the trenches who really made the whole system work. They were the ones building the ships, rowing across oceans, and loading the cargo. Their lives were far from glamorous, with long hours, hard labor, and the constant threat of storms or pirates, not to mention the fact that their pay probably wouldn't cover a single murex-dyed toga. Yet, without these individuals, the Phoenician juggernaut would have ground to a screeching halt. They were the backbone of the economy, even if they were often overlooked by history. Now, let's talk about one of the most revolutionary aspects of Phoenician society, their alphabet. In a world dominated by complex cuneiform and hieroglyphs that required a PhD in ancient linguistics to decipher, the Phoenicians rolled in with an alphabet that was simple, accessible, and incredibly efficient. It was like swapping out a typewriter for a smartphone. This wasn't just an innovation, it was a game changer. Their alphabet was composed of 22 letters, all consonants, which made it quick to learn and easy to use, perfect for trade, where time is money and efficiency is king. This alphabet wasn't just for scribes and scholars. It democratized literacy to some extent, allowing merchants to jot down transactions and sailors to keep logs. It was the ancient equivalent of shooting off a quick email or text. And just like our modern digital communication, it wasn't long before this system spread like wildfire. The Greeks, ever the culture vultures, adopted it and added vowels, which eventually led to the alphabet we use today. So next time you're typing away on your keyboard, spare a thought for the Phoenicians. They were the unsung tech giants of their day. But let's not get too misty-eyed here. While the alphabet was a brilliant innovation, it also served a rather pragmatic purpose. It was about business, pure and simple. Keeping accurate records meant fewer disputes, faster deals, and more profit. And for the Phoenicians, who were all about the bottom line, this was just another tool to keep them ahead of the competition. In essence, the Phoenician social structure was a well-oiled machine, with each class playing a crucial role in maintaining their economic dominance. The elites set the agenda, the merchants and craftsmen executed the plan, and the laborers and sailors kept the wheels turning. It was a society built on commerce and innovation, one that thrived on the open sea and the promise of new markets. Of course, this neatly organized hierarchy wasn't without its tensions. As with any society, there were disparities and power struggles. The elites might have held the reins, but the success of their ventures depended on the cooperation and skill of those below them. It was a delicate balance, and one that required constant negotiation and adaptation. Oh, there you have it, a glimpse into the intricate web of Phoenician society, where trade was the lifeblood, and the sea was both a highway and a battleground. It was a world of opportunity and risk, where fortunes could be made and lost with the turn of the tide. And while the Phoenicians might not have left behind grand monuments or epic tales, their legacy is woven into the very fabric of our modern world, from the letters we write to the trade routes we navigate. And that, my friends, is a history worth remembering. And speaking of trade routes, let's dive into how the Phoenicians became the ancient world's Amazon Prime, minus the drones and next-day delivery guarantees. Now, if you're imagining fleets of ships zipping across the Mediterranean faster than you can say, free shipping, you wouldn't be far off. These guys were the original logistical wizards, orchestrating a symphony of commerce that would give modern supply chain managers a run for their money. First, let's talk about their shipping lanes, which weren't so much lanes as they were vast networks that crisscrossed the sea like a spider's web. Picture this. From the shores of Tyre and Sidon, Phoenician ships set sail, laden with goods that ranged from the mundane to the magnificent. Sure, they traded in staples like grain, but they were also the exclusive dealers of the Tyrian purple dye. This dye was so valuable that it was basically the Gucci belt of the ancient world. Sporting something dyed in Tyrian purple was akin to declaring, "I have more money than common sense." This exclusivity allowed the Phoenicians to charge a king's ransom, literally. Records suggest that a pound of this dye could cost as much as a small estate, making it accessible only to the elite. You could say the Phoenicians were the original luxury brand moguls. Forget about a Birkin bag. If you had a toga dyed in Tyrian purple, you were the talk of the town. But let's not romanticize this too much. The Phoenicians weren't driven by the thrill of discovery or the urge to explore new worlds. Nope, these were practical folks with a keen eye for profit margins. Their ships weren't out there to map the stars or find new continents. They were out there to make bank. Exploring was all well and good, but only if it came with a hefty ROI. That's right, they were the original capitalists, and the world was their oyster, or, more accurately, their murex snail. And speaking of snails, producing Tyrian purple was a labor-intensive process that involved harvesting thousands of these little sea creatures. Imagine the smell of 1,000 rotting snails wafting through your workshop. The Phoenicians must have had noses of steel or a really good incense supplier. Yet, as laborious as it was, the payoff was worth it. The demand for this luxury good was insatiable, and the profit margins were astronomical. Now, you might be wondering how they managed to keep this monopoly going without someone else trying to horn in on their business. Well, the Phoenicians were as shrewd as they were savvy. They closely guarded the secrets of their production methods, ensuring that no one else could replicate the dye with the same quality or intensity. It was industrial espionage, before industrial espionage was even a thing. But it wasn't just the dye that had people buzzing. The Phoenicians were also master metalworkers and glassmakers. They were among the first to produce transparent glass, a technology that was as groundbreaking in its day as the smartphone is now. Their glassware was highly sought after, adorning tables from Egypt to Italy. If you were to host a fancy dinner party, you'd want Phoenician glass on your table, just like you'd want the latest tech gadget today. Of course, none of this trade would have been possible without their ships. The Phoenicians built vessels that were the ancient equivalent of cargo jets. These ships, like the Gorloi and the Biremes, were designed for speed and capacity, able to traverse the choppy waters of the Mediterranean with ease. They even had a ship model called the round ship for bulk transport, a kind of ancient oil tanker. They were packing more goods than a Black Friday sale at a big box store. These networks extended far beyond the Mediterranean. The Phoenicians reached the shores of Spain, where they traded for silver, and even ventured to the British Isles to source tin, a crucial component for making bronze. They established trading posts and colonies as far as North Africa, with Carthage eventually becoming a rival powerhouse in its own right. This was less about expanding an empire and more about securing supply chains, a practical strategy to ensure they always had access to the resources they needed. In all of this, what stands out is the myth-busting truth that the Phoenicians were less interested in the romance of the sea and more interested in the bottom line. They were the pragmatists of the ancient world, and their legacy is a testament to what can be achieved through clever strategy and a bit of entrepreneurial spirit. They didn't set out to change the world, but by focusing on trade and commerce, they ended up doing just that. Yet, for all their success, the Phoenicians remain somewhat enigmatic. They left behind few writings of their own, and much of what we know comes from the records of others, often their competitors. This has left room for romantic notions about their exploits, painting them as fearless explorers. But the reality is, they were more concerned with profit than with mapping new lands. Their journeys were calculated risks, not voyages of whimsy. And isn't that a story familiar to our modern ears? Love to romanticize the idea of exploration and discovery, but often the driving force behind it all is cold, hard cash. The Phoenicians were the blueprint for this kind of economic expansion. So, as we look back on their legacy, let's give them credit where it's due. They were the ancient world's masters of trade, the pioneers of global commerce, and the architects of their own prosperity. In the coming parts, we'll continue to peel back the layers of Phoenician society, exploring how their innovations and strategies influenced the world long after their ships stopped sailing. But for now, let's raise a toast with our imaginary Tyrian wine to the Phoenicians, the ancient world's savvy entrepreneurs who knew how to turn a profit and write a chapter of history while they were at it. And speaking of savvy entrepreneurs, let's turn our gaze to the Phoenician city-states, Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, where political intrigue was as common as a Mediterranean sea breeze. Imagine these city-states as siblings locked in an eternal game of who's the favorite. Spoiler alert, It wasn't always a tie. Each city was like a mini-kingdom, fiercely independent, yet bound by shared language and culture. They competed for trade dominance, much like tech giants vying for the latest gadget supremacy. Tyre, often the frontrunner in this sibling rivalry, was like the flamboyant eldest child, always trying to outshine the others. Known for its wealth and strategic location, Tyre was the bay and say of ancient cities. Everyone knew its name, and it never failed to impress. But Tyre's status wasn't just about show. It was a powerhouse of political and economic might. The city was famously adept at playing the long game, much like a seasoned poker player who only shows their hand when the part is just right. Meanwhile, Sidon, the middle child, often found itself overshadowed, but never out of the game. This city was a hub of craftsmanship, particularly in glassmaking, which was as groundbreaking then as AI is today. Sidon's glass products were highly sought after, and its artisans were the unsung heroes who kept the city economically relevant. Yet, while Tyre was out there dazzling with its nautical prowess, Sidon quietly built relationships, ensuring it was never left out of the trade loop. Then there was Byblos, the scholarly sibling with a rich history that made it the bookworm of the family. Byblos was a cultural and religious center, famous for its ties to the papyrus trade. Think of it as the Amazon of ancient scrolls. If you needed to write something down, Byblos was your go-to. But don't let the academic vibe fool you. Byblos knew how to leverage its intellectual capital for political gain, making it an indispensable part of the Phoenician network. These city-states, while competitive, were also shrewd enough to realize the benefits of cooperation against external threats. And boy, did they have threats. The major empires of the day, Egypt and Assyria, were like the neighborhood bullies with a penchant for expansion. Yet the Phoenicians had no interest in becoming just another notch on their belts. Instead, they mastered the art of diplomacy, turning negotiations into an Olympic sport. Take Egypt, for instance. The pharaohs had a soft spot for Phoenician timber, which was essential for building everything from ships to temples. The Phoenicians, always the pragmatic traders, used this to their advantage, securing favorable trade terms and ensuring their autonomy. It's like showing up to a potluck with the only dessert. Suddenly, everyone wants to be your friend. Assyria, on the other hand, was a more formidable challenge. This empire was as subtle as a sledgehammer, often opting for outright conquest rather than polite discussion. Yet, the Phoenicians managed to hold their own, often by paying hefty tributes to keep the peace. Some might call it protection money. The Phoenicians probably called it an investment in continued prosperity. After all, why fight when you can negotiate your way to safety? The Phoenicians' political acumen was like a masterclass in ancient realpolitik. They understood that power wasn't just about military might, but also about strategic alliances, timely tributes, and of course, a little bit of charm. They played the long game, ensuring that while empires rose and fell, Phoenician ships continued to sail, and their trade networks remained intact. Yet, this wasn't just about survival. It was about thriving in a world where power was as fleeting as a summer thunderstorm. The Phoenicians' ability to navigate these turbulent political waters was a testament to their cunning and adaptability. They were like the original spin doctors, able to turn any situation to their advantage with a well-placed deal or a strategic alliance. But let's not get too carried away with admiration. While the Phoenicians were undoubtedly skilled diplomats, their methods were not without controversy. Their reliance on tribute payments and diplomatic maneuvering could be seen as a lack of courage, a reluctance to stand up to their more powerful neighbors. Yet, from another perspective, it was an ingenious way to preserve their independence and ensure economic prosperity. In the end, the Phoenician city-states were a testament to the power of commerce and diplomacy over brute force. They understood that in a world dominated by empires, survival depended not on the sword, but on the art of the deal. It was a delicate balance, one that required constant vigilance and an unerring sense of timing. As we continue to explore the legacy of the Phoenicians, it's important to remember that their story is not just one of trade and commerce, but also of political savvy and strategic foresight. They were the original architects of globalization, laying the groundwork for a connected world long before the internet was a twinkle in anyone's eye. And so, as we prepare to delve deeper into the intricacies of Phoenician society, let's keep in mind that this was a culture that thrived on innovation and adaptability. Whether it was through trade, diplomacy, or sheer cunning, the Phoenicians carved out a place for themselves in history, leaving a legacy that continues to influence our world today. So, as we raise our imaginary glasses once more, let's toast to the Phoenicians, the ancient world's consummate survivors and masters of the political game. So, the Phoenicians, those ancient maestros of maritime trade and alphabetic wonders, have sailed us through quite the historical odyssey, haven't they? It's easy to get swept away by the tales of their nautical prowess, their dazzling purple dye, and their canny diplomacy. But hold onto your trireme, because we're about to dive into the real legacy they left behind, a legacy that's as much about gritty reality as it is about glamorous legend. First off, let's talk about the elephant, or perhaps the cedar tree, in the room, the Phoenicians' absorption into larger empires. By 539 BCE, they found themselves under the sprawling Persian Empire's umbrella, then later the Greeks, and eventually the Romans. It might sound like a sad end for people who once ruled the waves, but here's the kicker. Their influence didn't just vanish like smoke in the wind. No, it continued to ripple across history, weaving its way into the cultural and economic fabric of these conquering empires. Take their maritime trade expertise, for instance. The Phoenicians were the Steve Jobs of the ancient shipping world, turning the Mediterranean into their personal Apple store. Their trade networks were like an ancient GPS system, guiding goods and ideas across the high seas with unmatched precision. Even after being absorbed into larger empires, their trading techniques and routes became templates for others. The Greeks and Romans, no slouches when it came to empire building, adopted and adapted Phoenician methods, ensuring that their legacy lived on in the cargo holds of countless ships. But let's not forget about their most enduring contribution to human history, the alphabet. The Phoenician alphabet was the killer app of its time, a sleek, efficient system that transformed the way people communicated. With just 22 consonants, it was accessible and adaptable, spreading like wildfire across the Mediterranean. The Greeks, ever the cultural magpies, added vowels and passed it on to the Romans, who then shared it with the world. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and here we are, typing away on our keyboards, blissfully unaware that we're using a descendant of this ancient innovation. The Phoenicians didn't just write history, they gave us the tools to write it ourselves. Now, let's debunk a myth or two. The romantic image of the Phoenicians as fearless explorers braving the unknown seas for the sheer thrill of it. Well, let's just say that's a bit of a Hollywood embellishment. The truth is, they were pragmatists through and through. Their voyages were meticulously planned business trips, not impromptu joyrides. Sure, the notion of the intrepid sailor has a certain allure, but the Phoenicians were more about the bottom line than the horizon line. They were the ancient world's corporate strategists, not its adventurers. Their cultural exchanges, however, were the real deal. As they traded goods, they also traded ideas, technologies, and even religious practices. This exchange didn't just enrich their own society, it created a vibrant tapestry of interconnected cultures around the Mediterranean. They were the conduits of cultural fusion, spreading everything from papyrus scrolls to glassware. And in doing so, they laid the groundwork for what we might call globalization today. So, while they weren't out there discovering new lands, they were certainly discovering new ways to connect them. Let's not sugarcoat it, though their success wasn't always pretty. The Phoenicians could be as cutthroat as the murex snails they harvested. Their monopolies on certain goods, like that infamous purple dye, were maintained with an iron grip. Industrial espionage, secrecy, and strategic alliances were all part of the playbook. If you were a competitor, you could bet your bottom shekel that the Phoenicians would outmaneuver you, whether on the high seas or in the marketplace. Yet, for all their shrewdness and strategic brilliance, the Phoenicians ultimately remind us of a universal truth. Even the most powerful forces can be absorbed and overshadowed. Their city-states, once the beating heart of Mediterranean trade, became just another chapter in the histories of greater empires. But isn't that the human story in a nutshell? A testament to both our resilience and our impermanence. In the end, the Phoenicians were the architects of their own legacy. They showed us how innovation, adaptability, and a touch of cunning could turn the tide of history. Their story, while often overshadowed by the grand narratives of empires like Rome and Greece, is a reminder that sometimes the most profound impacts come not from those who conquer, but from those who connect. They may not have left behind towering monuments or vast empires, but their contributions to trade, riding, and cultural exchange are etched into the very foundation of our modern world. So as we close this chapter on the Phoenicians, let's tip our hats, or perhaps our murex-dyed togas, to these ancient traders. They were the unsung heroes of the Mediterranean, the hidden engine of ancient globalization, and the silent scribes of history's pages. Their legacy, like the sea they once mastered, continues to influence us in ways both seen and unseen. And isn't that a legacy worth remembering? Your morning begins with the clang of metal on metal, a sound so relentless it feels like a medieval alarm clock. Welcome to the world of the Knights Templar in 1119, where the quest for divine purpose is as gritty as the mud-caked roads under your boots. Forget what the movies told you about gleaming armor and gallant deeds. Here it's more rust and sweat than chivalry and shine. The Knights Templar were founded in 1119 by Hugh de Payens and Godfrey de Saint-Omer. Their mission, protecting pilgrims in the Holy Land, a noble cause wrapped up in a whole lot of medieval mess. Now, you might be asking yourself, why on earth would anyone sign up for this? Well, let's just say the medieval world didn't offer a buffet of career options. But here's the kicker. Joining the Templars wasn't just a job. It was a lifelong commitment, complete with a vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience. That's right, you're signing up for a lifetime of celibacy and obedience for a chance at spiritual glory. Plus, the promise of land, wealth, and eternal salvation dangled like a carrot in front of a donkey. And in a time when the average life expectancy was barely 30 years, you might think, why not roll the dice on some heavenly real estate? Let's talk about the armor. You know, that iconic Templar look with the white mantle and red cross. Sure, it looks cool from today's perspective, much like a medieval superhero costume. But in reality, wearing chainmail in the sweltering heat of the Middle East is more like being encased in a portable sauna. It's not just the heat that's unbearable, it's also the weight. Chainmail could weigh anywhere from 20 to 30 pounds, so imagine trying to fight or even move while lugging around a small child strapped to your body at all times. And then there's the warfare itself. Early medieval battles were not the strategic chess matches we sometimes imagine. They were chaotic, brutal, and often came down to sheer luck. Picture this. You're marching into a skirmish, and all you can hear are the screams of men and horses, the clash of swords, and the whistling of arrows. Meanwhile, sanitation on the battlefield is non-existent, so the smell is a mix of sweat, blood, and whatever else is rotting nearby. It's no wonder disease was often the biggest killer, claiming more lives than combat itself. But why were the Templars so focused on protecting pilgrims, you ask? Well, the answer lies in the economic and spiritual allure of the Holy Land. Jerusalem was the epicenter of religious fervor, a place where spiritual merit was thought to be as abundant as sand grains. The journey there was perilous, with bandits and hostile forces lurking along the way. By safeguarding these travelers, the Templars weren't just doing a good deed. They were staking a claim in the lucrative business of pilgrimage, which brought wealth and influence. Oh, and let's not forget about the banking. Yes, those same knights who took vows of poverty also became early pioneers of medieval finance. The Templars created a system where pilgrims could deposit funds in one location and withdraw them in another, essentially inventing the traveler's check. This made them incredibly powerful and wealthy, but also painted a giant target on their backs. So here you are, a cog in the vast machine of Templar enterprise. You might dream of land and glory, but the reality is a lot of hard work and even harder ground to sleep on. And while you're dreaming of home, remember that your service is not just a job, it's a divine mission, or so you're told. Your life is pledged to the order, and with it comes the hope that you'll find favor in the eyes of both man and God. But as you drift off, clutching your sword like a teddy bear, the thought lingers. Is this really the path to salvation, or just another way to get trampled under the relentless march of history? As you drift off, clutching your sword like a teddy bear, the thought lingers. Is this really the path to salvation, or just another way to get trampled under the relentless march of history? But there's no time to ponder life's existential quandaries, because, in the morning, you're jolted awake by the dawn call to prayer. Forget about hitting snooze. It's time to dive headfirst into the rulebook that governs your life, starting with the 3 big vows. poverty, chastity, and obedience. Sounds fun, right? Well, maybe if your idea of fun includes a strict regimen that makes boot camp look like a spa retreat. First up, poverty. This vow means you own nothing but the clothes on your back, and even those belong to the order. You're like a medieval minimalist, but not by choice. The Templars lived communally, sharing everything from weapons to meals, which often consisted of humble fare like bread, vegetables, and fish. Forget about any culinary delights. A Templar feast is about as exciting as an unsalted cracker. This wasn't just about humility, it was a practical move. By pooling resources, the Order could fund its operations and maintain its various properties across Europe and the Holy Land. In terms of wealth, the Templars were like the Apple or Amazon of the medieval world. Cash poor individually, but rolling in assets collectively. Then there's chastity. Ah, chastity, the vow that puts the no in romance. This was a biggie. The idea was that by renouncing earthly pleasures, you could focus entirely on your spiritual journey. But let's be real. For many knights, this vow was less about piety and more about logistical necessity. Life in the desert didn't exactly scream romantic getaway, and the constant threat of battle was a real mood killer. Plus, women were largely absent from Templar life, a result of the Order's rigid structure and the practical challenges of maintaining a monastic community on the battlefield. It's hard to woo anyone when your primary courting tool is a broadsword. Obedience is where things get really interesting. In the Templar world, questioning authority was about as welcome as a squire with no armor-polishing skills. The hierarchy was rigid, with a Grand Master at the top, and every knight pledged absolute loyalty to the Order. Orders were followed without question, whether that meant charging into battle or scrubbing the latrines. This structure was key to their military success. After all, a disciplined force is a powerful force. But it also meant that individual desires took a backseat to the collective mission, a sacrifice that was both empowering and dehumanizing. Now, let's talk about training and combat, because, spoiler alert, it wasn't all galloping into battle with swords raised high. Templars underwent grueling physical training, designed to turn them into medieval war machines. This included everything from sword fighting and archery to horseback riding and hand-to-hand combat. They trained in full armor, which was no small feat considering that chainmail alone could weigh up to 30 pounds. Imagine trying to do cross-fit in a metal suit. Now you're getting the picture. The goal was to be ready for anything, whether it was defending a fortress or launching a surprise attack on enemy forces. Speaking of fortresses, the living conditions weren't exactly 5-star. The Templars were stationed in various outposts, ranging from the cold, damp castles of Europe to the scorching deserts of the Middle East. These fortifications were strategically important, serving as both military bases and safe havens for pilgrims. But they were also harsh environments, with limited comforts and constant threats from enemy forces. In Europe, the stone walls did little to keep out the chill, and in the Middle East, the heat was relentless. It was a life of extremes, where a good night's sleep was about as rare as a unicorn. Even with these challenges, the Templars were seen as elite warriors, esteemed for their discipline and commitment. But this reputation came at a cost, both physically and mentally. The constant pressure to perform, the deprivation of personal freedoms, and the ever-present threat of death took a toll. For many, the romantic allure of joining the Templars was quickly overshadowed by the stark reality of their daily lives. So, as you lie there on your hard cart, surrounded by the snores of your fellow knights, you have to wonder, is this really the life you signed up for? The dream of noble knighthood may have brought you here, but it's the day-to-day grind that keeps you grounded. And while the world outside may see you as a hero, deep down you know that survival is the real victory in this brutal, unforgiving world. As the sun rises, you steel yourself for another day of duty, knowing that the path you've chosen is as much about endurance as it is about glory. So, as the sun peaks over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, you brace yourself for another day in the strange, dual life of a Templar knight. Today, your duties might involve less sword-wielding and more ledger-balancing, because, surprise, you're not just a warrior, you're also part of the medieval banking elite. That's right, the Templars didn't just swing swords, they swung deals, and they were pretty darn good at it. The Templars' banking system was like the world's first multinational corporation, with branches spread across Europe and the Holy Land. Imagine this. You're a pilgrim planning a trip to Jerusalem. You could carry a sack of coins across bandit-infested lands, or you could deposit your money with the Templars in Paris and withdraw it in Acre. They basically invented the medieval version of a traveler's check, which was a huge deal when the alternative was getting your money and scalp separated by highwaymen. This financial wizardry didn't just happen overnight. The Templars were entrusted with managing vast estates and properties, given to them by grateful patrons and monarchs who appreciated their services or were currying divine favor. By 1300, the order owned properties in France, England, Portugal, and beyond, turning them into a medieval real estate mogul. They managed farms, vineyards, mills, and even entire towns. It's said that at their peak, the Templars had 870 castles and commanderies. Talk about a property portfolio. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the treasure chest. The myth of the Templar treasure is the medieval equivalent of a blockbuster movie plot. Secret rituals, hidden gold, maps with cryptic symbols. But the reality, less national treasure and more accountant's notebook. Sure, they had wealth, but it was mostly tied up in land and loans. Their records show meticulous bookkeeping, not mysterious treasure maps. Picture rooms filled not with piles of gold coins, but with scrolls and ledgers, the medieval version of a spreadsheet. And about those secret rituals, another juicy myth. Yes, the Templars had initiation ceremonies, but sorry to disappoint, there were no secret handshakes or shadowy cabals plotting world domination. Their rituals were more about swearing obedience and loyalty to the order, not conjuring hidden powers. The real secret to their success wasn't esoteric knowledge. It was good old-fashioned discipline and military prowess. But this economic empire came with a catch. While the Templars were rolling in assets, the individual knights lived like ascetic monks, adhering to their vow of poverty. Talk about a paradox. Collectively wealthy, personally broke. You could be managing an estate worth a small kingdom, yet have no personal wealth to speak of. It's like working for a Fortune 500 company while couch surfing, because you can't afford rent. The Templars' financial success also painted a target on their backs. They became the go-to bankers for European monarchs, which was great until those same monarchs decided they didn't want to repay their debts. King Philip Roman IV of France, known for his creative approach to problem-solving, decided that instead of paying back the Templars, he'd just arrest them, charge them with heresy, and confiscate their assets. In 1307, this royal betrayal led to the dissolution of the order. It turns out, being too big to fail wasn't a thing back then. So, as you shuffle papers and manage accounts, you realize that in the Templar world, economic power was as important as military might. These knights were early pioneers of international finance, not just crusaders with blood on their swords. Their economic acumen left a lasting legacy, influencing banking systems long after their fall. But in the end, their greatest wealth was their network, one built on faith, discipline, and a bit of medieval ingenuity. As the sun sets, you pack up your ledgers, knowing that tomorrow might bring another battle, another financial transaction, or perhaps both. It's a strange life, but hey, who said being a knight was all about the glory? As you tuck away those ledgers, you can't help but marvel at the Templars' double life, part monk, part mogul, all while juggling the political circus that was medieval Europe. If you thought modern politics were cutthroat, try the medieval version, where alliances were as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. The Templars had to navigate a landscape where kings, popes, and even fellow knights were potential allies or enemies, or both, depending on the day of the week. The Templars' political savvy was as crucial as their swords and shields. They were the Swiss army knife of medieval diplomacy, forming alliances with the church and monarchs to maintain their power. But these alliances were as precarious as a tightrope walk over a pit of vipers. The Templars were officially sanctioned by the Pope, granting them a kind of medieval diplomatic immunity. This papal endorsement gave them the freedom to operate independently of local laws, a perk that made them the envy of many and the target of just as many. But let's not sugarcoat it. Being a papal favorite was a double-edged sword. Sure, it gave the Templars unparalleled freedom, but it also meant they were perpetually caught between the crosshairs of church ambitions and royal greed. Monarchs were often resentful of the Templars' independence and wealth, seeing them as a threat to their own authority. The Templars had to constantly balance their allegiance to the Pope with the realities of dealing with power-hungry kings. Enter the Crusades, the grand chessboard where the Templars would prove their mettle or meet their demise. The Crusades were a series of religious wars with the stated goal of reclaiming the Holy Land from Muslim control, but let's be honest, they were as much about politics and power as they were about piety. The Templars were the elite troops of these campaigns, fighting in battles that were as chaotic as they were brutal. Take the Battle of Montjuic in 1177, where a vastly outnumbered force of 500 knights, including Templars, faced off against the mighty army of Saladin. Against all odds, the Christian forces emerged victorious, a testament to the Templars' tactical prowess, and perhaps a bit of divine intervention or sheer luck. Yet, for every Montjuic, there was a Hattin, a catastrophic defeat that would haunt the Templars for generations. In 1187, the Battle of Hattin saw the Templars suffer one of their worst defeats. Trapped by Saladin's forces and parched by the scorching sun, the Christian army was decimated, and the Templar Grand Master, Gerard de Riedfort, was captured. This loss led to the fall of Jerusalem and a significant blow to the Crusader states, a bitter reminder that glory in battle was as fleeting as a desert mirage. The Templars' involvement in the Crusades wasn't just about swinging swords, it was about holding strategic territory. Their fortresses, like the famous crack des Chevaliers, were marvels of military engineering, designed to withstand sieges and serve as bases for launching attacks. These strongholds were crucial in maintaining a Christian presence in the Holy Land, but they were also constant targets for Muslim forces eager to reclaim their lands. And while the Templars were busy fortifying castles and leading charges, they had to keep an eye on the home front, where political winds could change faster than a knight could draw his sword. The Templars' influence made them indispensable to the European powers, but it also made them expendable when political tides shifted. They were the medieval equivalent of a heart-stark. Everyone wanted a peace, until they didn't. The Templars' political dance was a high-stakes game where betrayal lurked around every corner. Their supposed invincibility only increased the envy and suspicion among secular rulers, who were just as eager to exploit the Templars' weaknesses as they were to use their strengths. With their feet planted in the Holy Land and their heads in European courts, the Templars had to master the art of being everywhere yet belonging nowhere, a precarious balance that would eventually tip. In this tangled web of alliances and enmities, the Templars learned the hard way that trust was a rare commodity. Backstabbing wasn't just a euphemism, it was a literal occupational hazard. The Templars' downfall in 1307 wasn't just about greed or debt. It was a culmination of decades of political maneuvering gone awry. King Philip Roman IV of France, facing mounting debts and a restless population, saw the Templars as both a scapegoat and a treasure trove. His betrayal was swift and decisive, ending the order with a flourish of arrests and accusations, a grim reminder that in politics, as in war, the only certainty is uncertainty. As you ponder this political labyrinth, you realize that the Templar's story is as much about human ambition and folly as it is about knights and castles. Their journey from revered warriors to vilified outcasts is a cautionary tale of how power, once gained, must be constantly defended, not just with steel, but with shrewdness and foresight. And as the twilight of their order looms, the legacy of the Templars remains a testament to the timeless dance between faith and power, a dance that continues to echo through the corridors of history. But hold that thought. There's still more to unravel in this tale of ambition, faith, and the relentless march of history. And so, we find ourselves at the precipice of one of history's most infamous dates, Friday, October 13, 1307. If you're ever wondering why folks get jittery about Friday the 13th, you can thank the downfall of the Templars for that. It was on this seemingly ordinary day that King Philip Roman IV of France decided to pull off an early morning surprise party, sans the cake and balloons. Instead, he sent out arrest warrants for the Templars, accusing them of a laundry list of charges that would make even the most scandalous tabloids blush. Let's not beat around the bush. The accusations were as wild as they were varied. Heresy, blasphemy, idolatry, and even devil worship. The Templars were said to have spat on the cross, worshipped a mysterious idol called Baphomet, and engaged in unspeakable rituals. Now, before you get too caught up in the medieval melodrama, let's be clear. These charges were about as solid as a sandcastle in a hurricane. Most historians agree that Philip was less concerned with the Templars' spiritual practices and more interested in their treasure chests, or rather, their land, assets, and influence. You see, Philip was deeply in debt, primarily due to his expensive wars and his penchant for living like a king, which, technically, he was. But his kingdom's coffers were emptier than a tavern at dawn. The Templars, with their vast properties and financial acumen, were an irresistible target. Philip's plan was simple: accuse, arrest, and confiscate. The trials that followed were a mockery of justice, with Templars subjected to torture until they confessed to the outrageous charges. Confessions extracted under duress included stories of spit-filled initiation rites and shadowy ceremonies, yet these were tales spun from pain rather than truth. It's a grim reminder that in medieval courts, the line between fact and fiction was as blurred as a scribe's ink after a rainstorm. By 1312, the once mighty Order of the Knights Templar was officially dissolved by Pope Clement V, who was conveniently residing in Avignon, under the watchful eye of Philip. It's almost as if having a powerful king breathing down your neck could influence papal decisions. Who knew? The Templars' lands and wealth were absorbed by the Church and other military orders, while many knights found themselves either imprisoned or burned at the stake. One such martyr was Jacques de Marley, the last Grand Master, who was executed in 1314, cursing Philip and Clement from the pyre, both of whom, according to legend, died within the year. Coincidence? Maybe. Satisfying narrative arc? Absolutely. And here's where the legend begins to overshadow reality. Over the centuries, the Templars' tale has been spun into a web of intrigue and mystery, from hidden treasures to secret societies. They've been cast as guardians of ancient relics, protectors of secret bloodlines, and keepers of cryptic knowledge. Dan Brown and Hollywood have had a field day with these stories, transforming the Templars into the Indiana Jones of the medieval world. But the truth is far less cinematic. The Templars were, above all, a military and financial force, shaped by the harsh realities of their time: religious fervor, economic ambition, and political chess games played on a European board. Yet the myth persists, fueled by our fascination with secret societies and the allure of the unattainable. We love a good mystery, especially when it involves knights, treasure, and the tantalizing idea that something magical might be hidden just beneath the surface of history. The Templars, therefore, serve as a perfect canvas for our imaginations, a testament to our desire to find meaning and magic in the past. So what do we take away from the Templars' tale? Beyond the myths and legends, they remind us that history is complex and often unforgiving. The Templars rose to prominence through a mix of religious zeal and shrewd financial tactics, only to fall victim to the same forces of power and greed that propelled them forward. Their story is a mirror reflecting the age-old dance between faith, ambition, and the darker sides of human nature. And while the Templars as an order vanished into the annals of history, their legend lives on, a testament to the enduring allure of mystery and the eternal quest for glory, whether in battle or in the pages of a medieval ledger. As the final embers of their story flicker out, we're left pondering the true legacy of the Templars. They were more than just knights in shining armor or bankers in chainmail. They were pioneers navigating a world as treacherous as it was thrilling. Their tale, with all its twists and turns, challenges us to dig deeper into history, questioning what we know and embracing the complexity of the past. Because in the end, the Templars' greatest legacy might just be the enduring reminder that history is never as simple as it seems. It's a tapestry woven with threads of truth, myth, and the unending pursuit of understanding.